Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back. If there's anybody new to this session that wasn't involved this morning, could you just briefly introduce yourselves, or anyone that hasn't introduced themselves thus far, just so that we know who's in the room, please? Looks like everybody's been here before, so that's all good. I think we're a little bit over time, so I think we'll commence. Mr. Berry, we're in your hands. I think it's Mr. Heath next, isn't it? You're on mute. That's better.
Yes, sir, thank you. Mr. Heath's right here, so I'll just get him to read his highlights package.
Yeah, we're not that fussed on highlights package being read. If it to be used when we've got it, it's a guide, but use the 10 minutes or thereabouts to your own best effect. We're not rigid on it being read particularly, but we're in your hands on that.
Thank you, sir. I think we'll probably adopt a cautious approach to that. You read it, or you just walk through it if you like. Yeah, you try to read it. I'll probably read most of it, just get some of it.
Afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Excuse me, I'll just try and skip through my summary statement and not try and go chapter and verse.
I think what we're keen to do is to cut to the chase. We're really keen to understand the points of tension and why the views are different, and if there are sort of solutions to problems, then we're keen to hear those, as opposed to reading out what you did and what you studied and so on and so forth. We're really keen to, so that we can have a conversation with you about where there are differences and how they might be solved, if they are in fact able to be solved.
Sure. In that light, I'll focus on a couple of the issues as I see them that are still possibly in contention, relevant to my area of expertise and what I've been asked to look at, and that's in relation to some of the residential capacity around the existing area, and look at some of the economic effects and the opportunity related to the proposal in the context of Huntley. So the actual development itself has been well articulated, so I won't go through that. In terms of Huntley itself, I'm just referring to paragraph 6 here, paraphrasing it. Huntley itself over the last few years has seen a decline in employment, despite all the, I suppose, the policy inferences and will over the last sort of 10 to 15 years, so to speak. That despite that, we are still seeing a fall off or a drop off in employment in the local area. So there's a significant gap between the planning policy and the intention of those policies and what we're seeing play out in the market on the ground. We're not seeing the level of growth that's projected, that's been anticipated, or aspired to in many of the planning documents. And that comes down to a situation that's not only new to this area, but quite a few provincial areas around New Zealand, where you can only really get meaningful population growth if you achieve employment growth in that local area. There's a very strong link between achieving growth in jobs and growth in population. Without growth in jobs, the population aspirations really fall away quite quickly. So I see this as an opportunity to actually trigger some stimulus, with the stimulus being the employment opportunities at a localised level in Huntley anyway. DFO is now gone, so that's fallen away from my original evidence, evidence in chief, and a smaller localised convenience centre remains part of this proposition. That's fully supported. and that is by no means designed to accommodate or service all the retail and commercial service requirements of the Ohinewai population. So there will be significant spend overflow into Huntley, being the nearest town centre. I've used the example of the supermarket spend. It is the nearest supermarket countdown in Huntley. That will see significant uplift, as will some of the other retail offering and commercial service activity in the Huntley town centre. So overall, I see this development as a bit of a stimulus for commercial activity in the Huntley town centre overall, which is really unparalleled given the size of the development and the level of employment generated for many decades in this particular area of Waikato. In terms of the residential feasibility, there's been a bit of documentation and work done for future-proofing Waikato district that, in my view, shows there's a short-term or a residential sufficiency shortfall in the district, and that's particularly in the areas of residential product below the $580,000 price band. This product that's being proposed, in terms of the residential product being proposed in this application, will predominantly fall under the $580,000 price band. There has been a few price ranges put out there. I know Mr. Gaze had a price point up to $625,000. I think that was for some 3-bedroom residential product. My understanding is that there is a range of housing typologies sought to be delivered. They're not all going to be 3 bedrooms, some of them will be smaller product, and that will be delivered at a lower price point than what the 3-bedroom product price range would set. So I have a level of comfort around my view that some of that product could start in the low to mid 400s and obviously go up to the 625 price point that Mr. Gaze has identified in his evidence. So while that's a general spread, the vast majority of that spread falls under the $580,000 sufficiency deficit that's been identified in the capacity work. There has been a bit made about capacity in relation to what they've termed anticipated capacity. I have a view that that's not reliable capacity at this point in time. It's unzoned, really untested capacity that would be tested and come into play as part of the district plan review process. But at this point in time, there's no real material support or evidence that it could be used to support utilising that capacity over and above what can be provided in the OSP area here. In terms of the price points, it does sit higher than the Huntley average residential price point at this point, but it's well below Wastewater and Pocono. So in that it does fulfil a gap in the market at present. And it's what's well documented. It sits on the rail corridor in the Golden Triangle, very important. I think the majority of growth from about Taupo North fits within that Golden Triangle, and that equates to over 2/3 of all growth in New Zealand over the next 20 to 30 years. So clearly it's an area of focus, an area of growth, and an area of significant demand moving forward. And this sits well placed to be part of that growth story. I'd also like to reinforce my view, which comes through with Mr. Beer and the legal subs, and that this is a one-off unforeseen development. So it needs to be considered in that light, and I would consider in terms of the economic effects in that light. I haven't chosen to cherry pick separate aspects of the development. I've looked at it as a whole and consider overall, on balance, the economic benefits that can be generated as determined by Mr. Osborne and Dr. Wheeler significantly outweigh some of the potential costs associated with the development. For all intents and purposes, any deprived area in New Zealand would welcome this with open arms in terms of the opportunity that can be provided given the level of employment that could be accommodated within the OSP site. I think there's been a bit of feedback on the application in relation to the existing market of Ohinewai and Huntley and Waikato. For me, I don't want to draw that as the right or appropriate context. This needs to be seen as something from left field. This is a game changer for the district. That's going to change the employment structure of the local economy. That's going to change the demand and growth patterns for this particular area as a result of the application. So comparing what the opportunity is to the current market, to me, sort of misses the point a little bit. It doesn't really fully grasp the opportunity available through the application and the effects that will have on the local market in terms of it will change it significantly. So I view with a bit of a grain of salt the comparison to the existing employment composition and whether there is or isn't enough workers. This will clearly increase the worker participation rate of the local economy. And that probably covers some of the key points from me. And overall, I just think the potential costs that have been identified are really playing on the margins when you consider in the context of the potential economic benefits identified by Mr. Osborne and Dr. Wheeler. So I just think it's an opportunity, it was a significant opportunity for this local area that would be a shame to let go. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you have on top of that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Heath. Mr. Marg, do you have any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Heath, but I have no questions for you at this time.
Thank you. Mr. Fulton?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Heath. There's a huge amount of emphasis being placed on Huntley in this whole process, and it almost appears as if that's the only concentration there's been. But for the benefit of the likes of Tikawhara, which has got a housing development in that area, which are going to be reasonably low cost, we could find a lot of residents from that area also benefiting by this. The emphasis seems to me to be entirely placed on Huntley, but even from Taupori, it's only about 15 kilometres to Ohinewai. So is there a bigger base? You want 2,600 people involved here. You can imagine all the building time. I think it's got to be seen to be a lot bigger than just Huntley, isn't it?
The localised market includes Taupori as part of that. So it's Ohinewai, Huntley and Taupori. But to fill the 2,600 odd jobs that are potentially accommodated on the site at full development, yes, there is going to be a broader influence and draw of employment from broader than the local area. It's a benefit to the wider district as a whole, as well as to the wider region as a whole. So the impacts that Mr. Osborne and Dr. Wheeler have identified go well beyond just the localised market. But the localised market does include Taupori, so yes, it will have a positive effect on Taupori as well.
Okay, thank you. Yep.
Thanks, Mr. Fulton.
Thanks,
Mr. Cooney?
Yes, thanks, Mr. Heath. Can I, just on this impact on Huntley, can I just read to you what Mr. Tremaine says in his evidence in chief and get you to comment on that? Because I think you may have covered it in paragraph 6 of your summary statement, but anyhow, I'll just read you this. And he says in paragraph 7.5, in my opinion, the residential development proposed for Ohinewai is likely to compete with the regeneration of Huntley. Waikato 2070 contains a high-level plan for the regeneration of Huntley, which includes residential development staged over the next 30 years, with most of this occurring within the next 10 years. Residential development is envisaged to be mixed-use redevelopment, medium density and standalone houses. Some new commercial industrial land is also proposed. Of the 1,100 houses proposed by the APL development, at the absolute most, 300 of these would be purchased by staff relocating from Auckland. this means that there will be in excess of 800 homes for sale. This will be occurring at the same time that residential development is proposed for Huntley. You want to comment on that?
Yeah, I think I probably addressed that more closely in my rebuttal statement under section 4. But overall, I think I have those same aspirations for Huntley, as Mr. Tremaine outlines, but that's just, in my view, at the moment, without any concrete development that's going to deliver on that potential, it's just planning rhetoric. This is an application, I mean, how those aspirations, as outlined by Mr. Tremaine, are going to be achieved is yet to be determined, and he hasn't identified anything concrete that could deliver on those aspirations. The council and Future Proof have been planning on growth for Huntley in particular for many years, many decades. The actual employment's gone down in the last decade. You can plan for all the growth in the world, unless you can get employment and get actual job growth and business growth occurring there, you're just shuffling the decks on the Titanic. It is not plausible to use planning rhetoric as the answer to actually superseding or overriding actual real commercial development that can occur that can actually stimulate the growth. And I don't have a problem with what Mr. Tremaine says. Those aspirations are fantastic. How is it going to be delivered? The growth just simply will not be realised unless developments like this occur. And I'm not saying this development by itself is the panacea for Huntley. This is just part of the solution for growing Huntley moving forward. So this is a step in the right direction to realising some of that growth occurring. In terms of the residential product, this is going to broaden the residential topology base available for that market and broaden probably the range of price points of which you can buy product in the local area. So while there may be some overlap in terms of some standalone homes, my last look around Huntley, there was very little in the way of some higher density, good quality new, higher density either apartment or terrace home type product. So I think this development is an opportunity to broaden the range of residential on offer, and that would, while some of it will compete, yes it will, of course it will. It's part of the same market. That's a healthy sign in my view, because it keeps residential dwelling growth and rental growth for the local market. So I think there's some positive benefits for that aspect as well.
What are the, and it may be associated with what you've just said, but I think the position taken by the regional council through its planner is, well, because of the extent of this proposal, it should be planned for. Have you got a comment on that?
Probably best left to Mr. Oliver. Really.
Okay.
But I'd argue it is being planned for through this process. Again, we can plan for Huntley till the cows come home, unless we get development like this occurring in the local market. Nothing is going to be achieved. More of the same ain't going to solve Huntley's problems, unfortunately.
All right, thank you.
Just taking that from a slightly different angle, Mr. Heath, the work that you and Dr. Fairgray and others do inevitably involves using existing information to project and make projections as to what happens in the future, which inevitably involves assumptions. You know, so it's whatever you do is going to be wrong. It's just a matter of how accurate it is and all those sorts of things. And I suppose the question for you is, let's assume that the assumptions that you've made about future demand and what the market will do and everything, let's assume that that's wrong and there is very little uptake of worker ownership of these properties. or the properties aren't as affordable as first thought, or there's a lack of appetite in the market to buy at Ohinewai, for example. Any of those things that pan out differently from what you've assessed. So what? What's the consequences of being wrong? What's the downside, if there is one?
I think you just answered it exactly right. So what is the downside? The downside is the residential may not get built at Ohinewai to the level or extent that's proposed. So by no means are sleepyhead workers bound or have to live in Ohinewai, as I understand. They still have the freedom to go and buy a home in Huntley if they prefer to do so. And if they can't, well, then there's the opportunity to work with Sleepyhead to get into a product within a home in Ohinewai. So if it is deemed not attractive to the local market, or the demand falls away for, let's call it non-Sleepyhead product, then it's unlikely to be built. And then you go, well, what's the effect of that? It's just not built. So the risk, as I see it, would fall away significantly.
Okay, thank you. You've referred in your evidence and in your summary to the Housing Development Capacity Assessment from 2017.
Yes.
Can you just in very simple terms explain the alignment or otherwise with future-proof?
My understanding is the future-proof work and report was, and the numbers and the sufficiency data capacity around that was based on the work that Market Economics had done for the capacity assessment for Waikato. So it was sort of a flow on from it. And my understanding was they didn't undertake their own separate capacity work. I think they utilised Market Economics.
Yes, okay, no, that's my understanding as well. And I'm just sort of trying to build the building blocks up here. Since both of those processes, we've got a national policy statement on urban development that's come along. Do you see that as being fundamentally different in terms of what it's trying to achieve vis-a-vis what future-proof was trying to achieve in economic terms?
I don't know if it's fundamentally different, but I suspect it will require future-proof and Waikato and all councils to go back and have a re-look at some of their objectives, particularly around key transport nodes and commercial centres, to see what can actually realistically and feasibly be delivered in those areas. Clearly, there's, Mr. Berry pointed out to it, the idea of it is to try and enable development that's going to provide a positive contribution to the community. And I think some developments in the past, based on my experience around the country, have not got through the process as a result for a variety of reasons. I mean, the RMA at its basis is an enabling document. And the way I see this is a move towards ensuring development that actually does provide a positive economic impact on the community, to give it more encouragement to get through the process rather than being stalled at the gate. And I think the NPSUD will force councils, and particularly future-proof, to have a re-look at some of their aspirations and where they want growth to occur and where it is able to be
Right, no, that's helpful, thank you. I don't have any more questions. Is there anything from the panel?
No.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Heath.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our next witness is Dr. Wheeler, who's hopefully online. There he is.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon, Dr. Wheeler.
Afternoon, sir. Very well. What I thought I would do is go through the highlights of my submission, but I want to try and emphasise the things that I feel either I didn't communicate as well as perhaps I might have, either in my evidence or the summary, and which seemed to me to be critically important. The evidence and the numbers and so on you have in bulk, as you've said. So I've got really, I suppose, 3 points that I would like to highlight to the panel to think about. The first of those really is what strikes me as an economist is the magnitude of the costs and the benefits. On the benefit side, and I'll explain a bit more about this shortly, regardless of how you do the numbers or the math or whatever, they're very large. Just the simple proposal of Comfort Group to establish 1,000 jobs somewhere is a very large one. And so are the flow-offs. Now, the significant thing about that to me is that on the other side of that, the costs of not doing this proposal are very considerable, it seems to me. So that is my first point, that I think differentiates it from the numerous other cost and benefit analyses that I've done. And in fact, I think I've done in front of this panel or members thereof in the past, that the gap between the two is big, and the costs of not offering this option are very, very considerable.
Just on that point, Mr. Wheeler, and I raise it now, and I'm sorry for interrupting, but it's easier to do it some ways like this. The benefits are very large. You're saying the cost of not doing it will also be very large. Isn't it one offsetting the other? Isn't it a simple case of, well, those costs are really the benefits that you forecast? Is that too simple a way to put it?
It's certainly one way to put it, but I don't think it's just a simple offset. You have to ask, and Mr. Heath did in his evidence in a way, well, what would be the alternative? If not this, what is the cost we're going to bear? Which may be similar to saying what you were saying, yes, but it's not as if we were tracking along with, say, 5% growth in employment or something, and we're just going to go back to that. I'm not sure that I see other things on the horizon. So the costs of foregoing it are if you like, the positive costs. Now that sounds very upside down and strange, I know, but there's a distinctive loss, I think, which accompanies not pursuing the opportunity. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
Are you saying, just to clarify it for me, are you saying that when times are wonderful, the benefits may be whatever they are, but the downside of not proceeding aren't that great because people will find something else to do? But in circumstances where times are tougher, the lost opportunity is not so easily replaced. Is that the gist of it?
That's another way of putting it. This isn't just about a little bit more acceleration. It is about a paradigm shift, in fact, because the way of thinking is required to be different, but it's a quantum move. So that's my first point. My second one is that one of the things I think the large size of the benefits outweighing the costs does. One of the things it does is it creates a lot of headroom in which various technical, econometric, mathematical, even philosophical arguments amongst economists, technical specialists, squabblers about data and so on, rather disappear. And while all of us involved, on all sides of this application have applied all our usual professional diligence to it, often we end up not necessarily being able to agree all that well, or to get down, certainly not to a couple of decimal points. I'm saying in this case, you could be wrong by a significant amount, and the benefits still outweigh the costs very considerably. So I think that is something that the panel might like to consider at the finer level. The third thing that I want to talk about is related to both of those two things, and we've heard a lot about it recently, but I want to think about it just right here, and that is the impact of recent events and COVID and what's going forward. In the conference before or the pre-hearing conferences, we all agreed there was going to be a good deal more uncertainty and a good deal more volatility. To give an idea of what might that mean, they're sort of fine-sounding words, but at the moment, the volatility in equity markets, for example, and those that affect the investments such as those to be made by Comfort Group, is about 1.7 times what it normally would be. So that means that the uncertainty around, say, something like the number of jobs, the three of us have sort of said, look, we believe it's around 2,600. When the volatility increases to 1.7, as it's running at the moment, that means that number could be as high as 4,420 if things absolutely rocketed away, as say the US equities market has just recently, or it could be as low as 1,500 and 29, I think it comes out. So that gives you a feel for the level of uncertainty and therefore the difficulties in achieving the kind of benefits. And that tells me that if there are benefits there to be had, it's pretty brave to walk away from them. The second element of the post-COVID environment that strikes me as an economist is that the benefits offer a couple of things here. One is that we're talking about opening up the options of what might be available to people in the district in Huntley, but as someone pointed out, well beyond there as well. There's big spillover effects, and I think Mr. Turner talked about those. The number of options opens up significantly. And a second element that you'll have heard lots of people speak of is that a requirement of success in these environments is adaptation. And it strikes me that the nature of the proposal is one in which a good deal of adaptation is required by everyone. So it's not life as usual, but the proposal goes a good way in the right direction in those terms. So those are just three things that are mentioned in my evidence in chief and again in the various summaries, but perhaps haven't come through as well as they might, but which I think are vital in as much as anything else in the way we think about what we're trying to process here and what we're trying to assess. I'm very happy to try and expand on those or answer any questions, of course.
Thank you, Dr.
Can I
Wheeler.
Dr. Wheeler, just in relationship, could you elaborate around the volatility of equity in markets in the current 1.7 and how that, if you could just explain that as how you use that 1.7 and how it impacts on any economic gain or not so much economic gain for the development?
Yeah, I can certainly try. What it means is that usually, say the 2,600 jobs we're talking here, or indeed any kind of economic process or investment return in the market sits at around an average, and it goes above and below that average a little. But the effect of the pandemic has been to increase that, and it's increased that volatility, the range of possible outcomes by about 1.7 times. So, you know, under twice as much volatility, but it's increased very significantly. And so we've seen share prices rise up and down and companies' earnings rise up and down and all over the place. And it's evidence of a very uncertain economic environment. And of course, it means that something like the proposal of APLs is that much more valuable because it's there. As opposed to trying to find new things. It's a very risky environment. And the reason is that it's about 1.7 times as jumpy, if you like, as it moves around all that much more. And so there's that much more premium on things which are solid. Does that help?
Yes, sort of, but can I, maybe just to help me, are you then saying, based on the proposition that we've got in front of us, that we actually have more certainty versus what you're saying around the 1.7 due to COVID and the market's volatility, that what the proposition in front of us provides better certainty?
Yes, that's certainly one way of looking at it, that you've got an actual concrete proposition here on a proven operation that's going, compared with, say, attempting to start something new, attempting to find more development, attempting to rejuvenate the Huntley economy or the other district economies. So this is a little bit of certainty, and therefore it carries a bit of a premium over what might otherwise be the case, because investment's such a risky proposition. And here you've got an applicant who's prepared to, shift their business and do this. So yes.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Mr. Moog. Mr. Fulton?
Oh, I didn't have any questions. Thank you, Mr. Wheeler.
Mr. Kearney?
No, thanks, Mr. Wheeler. Thank you.
I've just got one, I think, Dr. Wheeler. What's your view as an economist on the principle that says a lot of the infrastructure associated with this proposal necessitates some degree of cost sharing from other entities, whether they be public entities or other private entities, and the concern that says the district council in this case might be left carrying the can for some of the development costs, and as a consequence of that, it will be a burden on ratepayers. Do you have a view on that?
Yes, I've got a couple of views about that. The first one would be is that to the extent that that's a risk, and I acknowledge it may be, it is going to be associated with any form of development, and it's really a problem that needs to be faced. The second thing is, I think that the last 10 to 15 years we've seen an evolution in the way we cost, price and allocate risk for infrastructural development. Now that's been a long and bumpy journey, and we're far from finished it. But we do at the moment have mechanisms in place capable of identifying the costs, probably better than we have had before, and then of linking them to developments and to all and each of the parties involved. I expect those mechanisms to improve over time. They will get better and better, just as they have over the last 5 years. So I acknowledge that there may be some risk, but there are mechanisms there, and they're improving as we get better at doing those.
All right, thank you. No, that's helpful. I've got no further questions. Thank you. Thanks for your evidence, Dr. Wheeler.
Thank you.
Now just getting Philip Osborne into position.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Osborne. Just when you're ready.
Afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
I have a summary statement that was prepared, but in order to speed things along, I will jump straight through the introduction to that. I believe Mr. Heath has already talked about the environment, the economic environment in which this development is being proposed, and the rather difficult times that are potentially being faced by it in terms of the lack of employment opportunities and the in fact decrease in employment in this localised area over the last 10 to 15 years. It's in that context that we obviously present the structure plan before us. Before moving into some of the numbers that I've assessed, some of the high level benefits, economic benefits of this proposal obviously are listed in my point 7 of the summary. It provides for greater opportunities, greater productivities, lower marginal cost, all the good things about providing more general economic activity in an area. Just in terms of my evidence itself, it has looked at specifically what the likely net benefits are to the regional and local economy. That is, that it's expected that not all the industrial activity that goes into this development might have been new to the region. In fact, some of the expected growth for the region may well be accommodated in this area. And so there are a number of assumptions around that I've provided in my evidence in chief that looks at what the likely net impact is on the region and in fact the local economy. Point 9 just outlines some of those benefits. It's expected over the 10-year period. This is utilising some of Dr. Wheeler's evidence in terms of the likely multiplier effect. It's expected that the region will benefit by about $650 million and provide 225 additional jobs per annum within the region. At a local level, and I think this is probably where there's a little bit of confusion about the numbers, in terms of the construction benefits to the local area, and understanding that there is probably a little less precision when you get down to a smaller and smaller area in terms of movement, economic parties and how they move within the region and the local area. So a little less precision, but it's likely to add around about $100 million over that period of construction as well, and approximately 42 jobs per annum within that local catchment. Again, these numbers have been done based on the existing economic environment, how many construction workers currently, or the proportion of construction workers within their local area and things like that. It's important to know that this level of activity is probably conservative as a local area, because as you provide increased activity through potentially 2,600 more employees, 2,600 employees, you're going to get greater retention of activity. That is, support businesses coming into the local area as well as the region that will actually facilitate and service some of the activities that are part of this development. So, looking at the ongoing benefits to the region of this activity, and again, this is not activity that would have been expected to come into the region. It's not accommodating expected growth. This is unique or additional growth. That level of activity we're expecting is about $222 million per annum, supporting around about 1,265 jobs within the region, again, per year. That 220, just as an aside, that 222 million drops slightly with the removal of the DFO. It drops to just under $200 million. Obviously, there's an uptake of industrial activity, but that industrial activity in my modelling is presumed not to be unique. That is just, it's a competitive location for industrial activity within the region, and therefore it will accommodate growth that potentially would have been already occurred in the district. So it drops to just under $200 million because of that removal of the DFO. The other localised benefits are the increased retail spending through the households that are provided there. This is going to contribute around about $25 million additionally to the localised area in terms of that retention. In terms of the convenience spend, we've got another $6.4 million actually in the development itself, supporting around 2,500 square metres of retail. Just the final point there is, having read through the evidence of the Regional Council and also the subsequent evidence within the 42A report, there's nothing in there that would alter my position in terms of these benefits. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Osborne. Mr. Fulton.
I don't really have a question, but interesting to relate those figures and putting them in comparison to what the Regional Council has been suggesting. So, yeah, pleased to have those. Thank you very much. Good.
Mr. Mark?
Nothing from me, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Cooney?
Yes, Mr. Osborne, I think you've tried to clarify the 100 million that you mentioned. That's $100 million. What is that impact on the region for construction over 10 years? Is it?
There are two numbers there. At a regional level, it's 644 million. At a localised catchment level, it's around about 100 million. as I say, the precision, the precise number gets a little bit, there's a little bit more margin of error within that, but we're expecting about 100 million. That obviously goes up as you get more of that activity locating within the local catchment as well.
Okay, that's for construction.
That's for construction, yes.
And for the development itself in operation, you're saying the impact, the economic impact benefits would be in the region of 225 million just for the Sleepyhead proposal, is it?
For the Sleepyhead proposal, so there's a number of components within that. It's the Sleepyhead proposal, the Sleepyhead operation itself, along with a proportion of the residential dwellings. So there's an expectation that some of the movement will come from Auckland, so there'll be new residents within the district that wouldn't, or the region that wouldn't have otherwise located there. That obviously contributes in terms of retail spend and other activities to the region. And there's also a certain degree of the additional industrial that's being proposed that will actually accommodate services that will be there because of Sleepyhead. It's a smaller proportion, but it's a proportion nonetheless. And so that activity has been generated by Sleepyhead being there by itself. So
and that's estimated at 225. If the whole proposal is successful and it's operational with the 1,100 houses, the development of the industrial area, and for what sort of benefits are you looking at there, the impact?
You're looking at all those being a net benefit, then Dr. Wheeler addresses that in his evidence, and I think it's close to $8.5 billion over the 10-year period. So,
how much?
8.5 billion, $8.5 billion.
Over what period?
Over a 10-year period.
Over a 10-year period.
That's the level of that.
Okay. Now, without giving me an economic a lecture, when you say impacts or the benefit, what are you talking about? What sort of, can you just give us in a generic way what they translate into?
So we're talking about essentially an increase in activity through increased household income, the increased production through actual manufacturing for Sleepyhead and so forth. So we're essentially talking about more jobs and more money.
And does that include Sleepyhead's internal profits as well? Does it?
That includes some Sleepyhead spending for a lot less at a localised level, but more at a regional level in terms of Sleepyhead spending on inputs into its production process. There's some degree of profit that potentially, but that would go beyond the region at that point. There are benefits obviously to the Sleepyhead production that are national benefits as well.
So we're talking about external benefits external benefits beyond Sleepyhead's own profit margins, etc.
That's correct. Yes.
Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. They're quite considerable benefits, aren't they?
I mean, as I think we've talked about through here, it's the relative benefits that are probably more dramatic than anything else. We've got an area that is essentially suffering economically, has some very volatile industries that it's involved in. It's highly involved in agriculture, obviously mining and so forth, and production and so forth, and that in terms of its sustainability is uncertain at the very least. So the provision of this in this area goes beyond probably, as I think Dr. Wheeler has alluded to, goes beyond simply the numbers. It goes to actually supporting a community that may well struggle continually for the next couple of decades if this isn't provided.
Okay. And we've heard a lot of evidence about, well, there's no certainty all this will happen. What's your view on that from an economic perspective in terms of risk?
I would suggest that the risk is probably the Ambry properties more than anything else. They obviously have a clear motivation to provide this in a market that is fairly lacking that motivation at the moment and that certainty. So I believe that if you're going to pick a particular project and pick it through the propensity to accept risk, this is probably one of the lowest risk options that are available in the market at the moment.
Okay, thank you.
Just a couple of questions from me, please, Mr. Osborne. You've given us some numbers, and you've talked about what the construction value is, what the ongoing annual injection into the economy will be, so on and so forth. Can you, for comparison purposes, line the benefits that you're predicting here with something else as a comparator? I mean, you could compare it to a corner dairy and say it's, you know, a gazillion times more. But is there something that this, in terms of its economic profile, would be similar to, that we could draw a comparison with?
This would be similar to a significant Fontura operation coming and locating here that wasn't already here. There are very few, and I think it was Dr. Fairgrave's statement that said that there are probably 9 industries in New Zealand that have, at a single site level, this level of activity and this opportunity. And that probably speaks more to the level of impact.
The fridge and stuff. Just let me just check that it's.
Excuse me, I'm not sure who's on David's iPhone,
right.
but could he turn the
just jump
sound
the
off, please?
Oh, I think it's been muted. That's good. I think in terms of its opportunity, it's almost unprecedented. But historically, it's again almost to something like a significant manufacturer of agricultural products coming into an area. There are very few single site businesses like this in New Zealand, just simply because of the way that historically these businesses have grown up and their ability to actually find land that suits all their needs. Sleepyhead probably is relatively unique in being able to locate on one site due to the provision they'll have from the rail and the access to the markets. There are very few others that could actually agglomerate their activities like this in one location.
All right, thank you, Mr. Osborne. That's helpful. Thanks for your evidence.
Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, that concludes the second tranche of evidence. And we're now, as you can see from page 18 of the submissions, moving into potential site constraints and site suitability, dealing with a miscellaneous issues in relation to the site itself. And this bank of evidence also includes the evidence of Messrs. Spake, Stafford and Lyons in relation to the Ralph Estates and the prospect of being able to mine that coal. So the first of these witnesses is Nicholas Spake.
Thanks, Mr.
You wouldn't mind just while Mr. Spake's getting organised, can you just give me 2 seconds? I just want to bring up, I was loading these up ahead of time and I need to upload these ones after the economics package. So it'll just take me just a moment to do that, if you just bear with me for a moment. All right, thank you. I'm sorted out now. So just when you're ready, thanks, Mr. Spade. If everyone else ready?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
So my name is Nick Spate. I'm a senior geotechnical engineer with a company called Initia. We have been providing geotechnical services on this project since late 2018. At which time we completed a pre-purchase geotechnical assessment. for APL. I won't read through any of my other qualifications there unless...
No, we can take
you'd like
those
to
as
hear
read,
them.
thank you.
Okay, so I'll just read my evidence now, or my summary evidence verbatim. In assessing the suitability of the land, a series of geotechnical investigations have been undertaken. These confirm that the land is generally underlain by between about 3 and 10 metres of recent alluvial soils comprising sands and very soft to firm clays, silts and peat. Older alluvial soils comprising interbedded sands, silts, clays and peat are present below the recent deposits. Rock is anticipated at depths of 100 metres or more below ground level. The geology and the specific ground conditions at the site will present several geotechnical challenges for development. The sand layers below groundwater level are assessed as being susceptible to liquefaction during seismic events, and soft soils, predominantly the peat and soft clays, are highly compressible when surcharged, e.g. from new fill placed to lift the site levels and also from building loads. These geotechnical risks will need to be appropriately mitigated for future development of the land. Preliminary geotechnical analyses and assessments have been undertaken to assess the relative soil compressibility due to surcharging and susceptibility to liquefaction under ultimate limit state seismic events. With regard to soil compressibility, figure 529-004, which is attached in my primary evidence, illustrates the estimated ground surface settlements that could occur due to surcharging of the site, with an overall pressure of about 45 kPa assumed. 45 kPa is really equivalent to about 2.5 metres of fill of a typical soil, or 1 metre of new fill, plus loading from a typical light industrial warehouse slab. The predicted settlements range between about 55 millimetres in ground that's not particularly compressible to greater than 2,000 millimetres, which is 2 metres, under a 45 kPa load. Figure 529003 in attachment A of my main evidence illustrates the calculated liquefaction severity number across the site for an ultimate limit state earthquake. The liquefaction severity number, or LSN for short, is an index which was developed following the Canterbury sequence of earthquakes and is used for categorizing the effects of liquefaction for different ground conditions and variability in soils. The LSN values at the site, at the Ohinewai site, range between 0, with no expression of liquefaction, to greater than 50, which indicates potential severe damage. The Sleepyhead Estate Master Plan was prepared with consideration to the key geotechnical risks at the site, particularly the settlement risk for soft soils. And as can be seen from the master plan, proposed development has been avoided or certainly limited in areas of the site that are underlain by highly compressible soils. Parks and wetland reserves are proposed over the eastern and central areas of the site where the softest soils are present. Ground improvements will be required to prepare most of the land for future development. Several different options have been considered, including deep pile foundations for all buildings, stone columns or rammed aggregate piers, excavation and recompaction or replacement, dynamic compaction and preloading. A summary of ground improvement options which could be considered for the site are presented in the table in attachment B of my main evidence. The preferred ground improvement options have been identified for the site as dynamic compaction, excavation and recompaction or replacement, and preloading. Dynamic compaction or excavation and recompaction or replacement are proposed to mitigate the liquefaction severity issue, and preloading is recommended to mitigate the post-construction settlements, that's in the areas of soft soils or compressible soils. In some areas of the site, ground improvements will be required to address both liquefaction and settlement risks, that meaning that there may be a requirement for 2 types of ground improvements in certain areas. A dynamic compaction field trial was undertaken in allotment 405 to the north, in the northwestern block of the land in September 2019. And that testing was undertaken prior to field testing, geotechnical testing was undertaken prior to and following the dynamic compaction trial to evaluate the efficacy of this method. The results of those tests demonstrated that dynamic compaction is an effective means for mitigating liquefaction susceptibility in soils extending up to 5 metres below ground level. It is currently the preferred method for ground improvement at Ohinewai for liquefaction risk mitigation, compared with excavation and replacement and recompaction, as it is significantly faster, less expensive, more effective at densifying soils to a depth of 5 metres compared with just 3 metres, which you would get for the excavation and recompaction method or replacement. It also mitigates the risks associated with excavating below groundwater level that would otherwise be required if we had to dig out soils and replace them. Preloading will be required in most areas of the site where there is a net increase in ground surface stress due to the proposed development. Preloading involves the temporary placement of fill above the final design ground level to initiate settlement of the subsurface soils to depths of about 30 metres below ground level. The preload is, the preload is usually held in place until settlements are approximately 90% of the estimated long-term total, or until estimated residual settlements are considered tolerable to the proposed future development. Timeframes for preloading are expected to range between 6 and 12 months depending on ground conditions, preload heights and the development type. The geotechnical effects of the proposed development from earthworks, construction of civil infrastructure such as roads, buried services, etc., and new buildings are expected to be limited to settlement from either surcharging of ground levels, such as the placement of new fill or buildings, as I mentioned before, or from lowering the groundwater level. During construction, there may also be vibration and noise effects from dynamic compaction. The off-site settlement, the off-site settlement effects of surcharging the ground from placement of new fill and or building loads are expected to be negligible at distances of about 10 to 20 metres from the works area. Therefore, this effect can be relatively easily mitigated and controlled by avoiding or minimising surcharges close to the building properties where existing buildings or infrastructure are located. The effects of groundwater drawdown due to excavations below groundwater level can be controlled if necessary by installation of grout curtains, sheet pile walls, slurry walls, or other impermeable materials structures for cutting off groundwater flows. Where large areas of the site are sealed with impermeable surfaces such as pavements and roofs, this can have a rainfall shadowing effect. A reduction in groundwater level can potentially induce consolidation of compressible soil, in particular the materials which are the roto-cowal formation peat and clay soils. But where necessary, this can be mitigated by the installation of stormwater soakage devices to recharge groundwater levels. However, I do note that the proposed ground improvements at the site, i.e. the preloading, will effectively mitigate these effects of a reduction in groundwater level. The effects of rainfall shadowing outside the site boundaries are expected to be negligible. Dynamic compaction field trials completed at Ohinewai have demonstrated that vibration magnitudes are expected to be less than the typically permissible magnitude of 2 millimeters per second peak particle velocity at distances of 50 meters or more from the dynamic compaction works. If ground improvement for liquefaction mitigation is required at distances closer than 50 meters from existing dwellings, it may be necessary to employ alternate ground improvement methods, such as the excavation and replacement or recompaction option I mentioned earlier. I have read Mr. Dean Ferguson's statement of evidence for the Ralph Estates, and in my statement of rebuttal evidence, I have concluded that whilst an open cast coal mine may be technically feasible at Ohinewai, such works would result in significant groundwater dewatering to depths of about 80 metres or more below ground level, with widespread ground surface settlements for a 19 megatonne open cast pit. In the location indicated in Mr. Ferguson's evidence, settlements of up to 3,800 millimetres, that's 3.8 metres, could occur directly adjacent to the pit perimeter, with up to 1.4 metres of settlement at State Highway 1 and at the North Island main trunk line. This settlement would increase flood risk vulnerability within 2 kilometres of the pit and possible long-term inundation, including ponding, and already low-lying land. Significant damage to buried infrastructure and housings buildings within the Ohinewai township and adjoining areas is also possible. Before future development of the Ohinewai site proceeds, it will be essential that a comprehensive scope of geotechnical investigation and laboratory testing is undertaken. And this will be required to determine specific ground improvement requirements for earthworks, civil infrastructure and buildings. This would ideally be completed in stages as the development progresses. In terms of groundwater considerations and the potential need for stormwater soakage, further groundwater monitoring and assessment will be required during resource consent and subdivision consent stage. And that is the end of my summary evidence.
Thanks,
Happy
Mr.
to take
Spate.
any questions.
Mr. Kearney, have you got any questions?
No, thank you. No.
Mr. Mark?
No, nothing for me, thank you.
Mr. Fulton?
Yeah, just a question on the preloading and so on of these soils. Is there sufficient material on site of the property to do all this work, or will it have to be brought in? Have you done that calculation?
Overall, there is insufficient material on site, so materials will need to be imported, both to lift the site to design levels and to preload parts of the site.
I'm just looking through some of the amount of earthworks that's going to be required on site, and that's filling of the lowlands and so on to make these sites suitable for the industrial area. There seems to be then a lot of have to cut and lower ground levels. Is that true, especially along the Tahuna Road where the higher part of the land is? Would that be used to do this preload as well?
So some of the material for the two spurs, which run in a sort of a north-south alignment, will be borrowed to be used as fill. The higher land along the southern boundary, which Tahuna Road sits on, I don't imagine that will be cut down significantly, because it still has to be obviously left in place to some degree along the ridgeline there. But there would be some re-terracing of the ground up in that area to support development. The cut one from that area, as I said, would be used as fill, but almost certainly there's going to be a requirement for a lot of material to be imported to be used to lift the balance of the site and to preload. The other part of your question was in relation to groundwater in those areas. Is that right? Yeah, no, so those excavations are unlikely to extend below the groundwater level because they're up at a higher elevation. The groundwater level seems to sit down at about RL 7.5 to slightly lower in the eastern side of the site.
Okay, thank you.
Can you just help me put your conclusions into some sort of context, Mr. Spate? Because if you read your evidence on its face, there's words like risk and substantial and mitigation and further work and monitoring and so forth, which might lead you to the conclusion that says, yeah, this is doable, but it's, an awful lot of effort. Can you put this site into the context of other sites in the Waikato district in terms of their ease of construction? And more importantly, explain to me how difficult and how out of the ordinary, if you want to put it that way, these sorts of measures that you're talking about are. And would you be saying the same irrespective of where this was? Or are these risks and problems that you've identified typical geotechnical issues that you'd expect to routinely address anyway?
Okay, so the first part of your question is there to put the site into context. It is a challenging site from a geotechnical perspective. So we are grappling with two key issues. One is liquefaction susceptibility. Now that's where you have sandy materials present at ground surface and a high groundwater level. And we need to address that by ensuring that we've treated that so that if there is a large seismic event, there is no life safety risk associated with buildings collapsing. Okay, so part of the site has that issue where the sandy materials are present at near surface levels. The other key issue is the soft soils. And we need to address those in a different fashion, which I've mentioned is likely to be preloading. So to come to the second part of your question, are these sorts of constraints typical? I wouldn't say they are typical in New Zealand, but they are quite typical in the North Waikato. The types of soils which we've got at Ohinewai are present in great swathes of the land, the low-lying land adjacent to the Waikato River, and so have been addressed by others in developments. In particular, I could name the development of State Highway 1, which is obviously very close to the boundary of the site. As they've progressively extended State Highway 1, they've had to deal with very similar ground conditions, which involves a lot of treatment to address settlement, and then also the liquefaction issue for structures. So I would say that the development is entirely feasible on this land, but it will require quite a lot of work to get stable building platforms. And we have, as I mentioned in my summary evidence there, identified land which we don't think will ultimately be suitable for development because it will require too much effort to bring it up to standard. And that's the land at the eastern end and in some of the lower-lying areas in the centre of the site. I'm not sure if that satisfactorily answers your question.
Yeah, it does. But just leading on from that, you've mentioned Christchurch and the post-earthquake situation, something that I'm fairly familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
They have in their district plan, essentially a liquefaction overlay and a good ground overlay, if I could call it that. How do these areas that you're talking about at Ohinewai compare to some of the areas in Christchurch that are liquefaction prone? Is it better, worse, or about the same?
In some of the most liquefaction prone areas in Christchurch, I would say we have similar conditions in the liquefaction prone areas of the Ohinewai site. So
what about the site? What about the parts of the site where the buildings are proposed, though?
In some parts of the site where the buildings are proposed, yes, we have similar liquefaction issues where those sandy materials are present at ground surface levels. However, the liquefaction severity number, which is the LSN number I referenced in my evidence, that's used as a sort of a gauge to or an index to compare sites of a different type and with different soils, but with similar types of liquefaction risk. And we're sitting at the higher side of that for a good chunk of the Ohinewai site. The irony is that where we don't have a liquefaction risk, it's because we've got the soft clays present at ground surface level. So in turn, we then have the settlement risk, which is can be a little easier to rectify. So yeah, really in summary, it certainly isn't an easy site, but we have gone through quite a process to demonstrate that it is feasible. And in fact, we've been able to demonstrate that it's actually also economically practical and feasible to develop as well. And we've come up with some quite cost-effective ground improvement options, which we have actually instigated trials for. And as I mentioned, they've been quite effective. So we're very confident that we can improve the land sufficiently to support the development proposed.
All right, thank you, Mr. Spate. That's helpful. Thank you.
No problem.
Mr. Berry.
Is David Stafford, who's dealing with groundwater from Untitled. There he is.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mr. Stafford. Just when you're ready, thank you.
Brilliant. Okay. My name is David Stafford. I'm a senior hydrogeologist at the consulting firm Untitled Partners.
We don't need to go through all the name, rank, and serial numbers. We've read all that.
Okay.
We're just keen to get to the guts of your evidence, please.
Okay, I'll launch straight into the summary.
Thank you.
The Tauranga group, comprising the Hinewera, Karipiro, Puketoka, and upper sandbeds of the Whangamarine Formation, is the major aquifer at site. These more permeable formations generally occur over the interval between 10 and 50 metres beneath the site, increasing in thickness to the north and east. The Tauranga group aquifer is predominantly confined by an overlying low permeability silt and clay layer associated with the lower Rotokawa Formation. The upper Rotokawa Formation is characterised by peaty layers present across low-lying areas of site, typically below 9 meters RL. These peaty layers reach a maximum thickness of approximately 9 meters to the east of site. The Tauranga Group aquifer is currently used by a small number of permitted groundwater takes across the site and the neighbouring Ohinewai township for the purposes of stock and domestic water supply. Current aquifer use is considered minor with regards to the total resource of the Tauranga Group aquifer. Development of the site is anticipated to have a negligible impact on overall recharge to the Tauranga Group aquifer or the existing groundwater flow directions due to the presence of the confining Rotokawa formation. Negligible changes in groundwater levels within the Tauranga Group aquifer is anticipated. Consequently, there will be no effect on neighbouring groundwater users surrounding the site. The primary sources of recharge to permeable peats of the upper Rotokawa formation is from direct rainfall recharge and hydraulic connection to Lakes Rotokawa and Waikiri. There is the potential for minor localized alteration to rainfall recharge pathways to the Rotokawa peat as a result of increased impermeable surfaces associated with the development. As a result, infiltration may be required in some parts of the site to maintain groundwater levels within the Rotokawa peat to prevent ground consolidation. This consideration is addressed as part of both the stormwater management strategy and the geotechnical assessment presented by Mr. Wadden and Mr. Nick Spate respectively. There will be no off-site groundwater reduction within the Rotokawa peat as a result of the development. Second part of my summary pertains to rebuttal from Ralph Estates regarding the proposed open pit mine. My rebuttal evidence addresses the issue raised by Mr. Ferguson and Mr. Gray concerning the potential for an open cast coal mine located at Ohinewai. Specifically, I address the environmental impact of major dewatering around the proposed pit, including the potential impact on Lakes Rotokawa and Ohinewai. Mr. Ferguson's evidence provides details of a mining scenario prepared by Solid Energy New Zealand in 2015. That mining proposal requires excavation of a large portion of the APL site to develop pit slopes to access coal seams within the underlying Tikawiti Group south of Tahuna Road. Mining the coal resource within the Tikawiti Group would require the full thickness, approximately 80 metres, of the overlying Tauranga Group to be dewatered. The required groundwater drawdown would therefore result in a widespread cone of depression in groundwater levels around the mine, which would have significant implications for ground consolidation and surface water features hydraulically connected to shallow groundwater. Lakes Rotokawa and Ohinewai are hydraulically connected to shallow groundwater within the surrounding peat-dominant upper Rotokawa formation. Dewatering of the Rotokawa formation may therefore result in depletion of these lakes. Mr. Ferguson refers to Weaver's open cast pit, which was excavated through the similar Tauranga Group soils in close proximity to Lake Wahi, as a reassuring example of what could be expected at Lakes Rotokawa and Ohinewai. I acknowledge that in the case of Weaver's pit, Lake Wahi was minimally impacted as it was well sealed by a thick lake bed layer of mud. PDP has historically been involved with the hydrogeological assessment of effects of Weaver's pit. However, Lakes Rotokawa and Ohinewai are significantly cleaner lakes. They are both recharged predominantly through shallow groundwater connection to the surrounding peat. As a result, Lakes Rotokawa and Ohinewai receive a reduced sediment load, and therefore a sealing layer of lake bed mud cannot be assumed. Given the hydraulic connection between Rotokawa peat beds and Lakes Rotokawa and Ohinewai, it is my opinion that dewatering of the peat would impact lake levels to some extent depending on the efficacy of the mitigation measures. It is my view that dewatering required for open cast mining at Ohinewai could have pronounced groundwater associated effects. This includes significant ground settlement and depletion of groundwater dependent lakes. That concludes.
Thank you, Mr. Stafford. I should probably declare that my first ever real job was managing water investigations at both Weaver's open cast mine and then the Ohinewai, I think, big open cast mine back in the mid to late 1980s. So I've forgotten it all, but I probably should declare that that background. Let's just see if there's any questions. Mr. Mark?
Look, no, none from me at this point, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Cooney?
No, thank you.
Mr. Fulton?
No, I don't have any other. Thank you.
No, and I don't either. Thank you, Mr. Stafford. That's all pretty clear. Thank you very much. Thanks for your evidence.
Thank you.
And now we've got Mr. Lyons, sir.
Thank you.
Hi, Commissioners. I think you'll find that our administrators stopped my video, so they'll need to restart it themselves.
That would be a good idea.
Now I've got the option to do that. Thank you. I will skip past the first couple of points in my summary, sir, if you're amenable.
Yeah, and you don't need to read it slavishly. I mean, we've read it, and
Understood.
We're keen to understand the conclusions, where you disagree with Mr. Ferguson and others. So all the background stuff about, you know, what layer overlays what, we can take that as read, I think. So we'll leave you to take us through it rather than read it.
Thank you, sir. I guess then I'll leave the ground conditions to the summaries already provided by Mr. Stafford and Mr. Spate.
Thank you.
What's important to note is where the coal is positioned. So beneath the soft sediments that we've already talked about, there is a Tikawiti group, which is the coal-bearing strata. That's a sequence of siltstones and sandstones. And there is, at depth, a thick subbituminous coal seam. This coal resource has been understood for a number of years. There's been a range of ground investigations that have been completed, including State Coals in the 1980s, and information that Mr. Ferguson provided in his rebuttal evidence as well, or his evidence in chief rather. But a mine's never been developed at the site to extract that coal. An important thing to consider in the discussion around coal is demand. That's fallen over recent years due to low-cost natural gas for the production of power and an increasing focus on renewable energy and concerns around carbon emissions. To exploit the coal resource at Ohinewai, there are a range of ways you could do that, traditional open cast and underground mines. However, I note that both of those would be pretty technically challenging. I've set out a range of issues in my point 7 of my summary in relationship to the issues facing an open cast pit. They're reasonably straightforward. The soft sediments mean that you have to have very, very gentle slope angles. And even to accommodate those gentle slope angles, and I believe Mr. Ferguson has talked about angles in the vicinity of 10 to 12 degrees for the Tauranga group. That's from horizontal. You still require a large amount of dewatering in advance of construction to make those pit walls stand up. And then you also have a very large area that you need to set aside, at least initially, for overburden disposal. Now, depending on where you put that, you will run up against those same soft soils in terms of how those overburden disposal sites perform. In terms of an underground mine, there are a range of issues that I can see there as well in terms of site development, which is the cost of access shafts, keeping those shafts and the drives from converging, the type of equipment that you can actually use to take the coal out. You can't actually use the most efficient gear, so you reduce the volumes that you can take out. managing groundwater inflows, managing the effects of surface settlement, and high capital startup costs. So, the conclusion that I've drawn is that given the challenges facing traditional methods of extracting the coal, it's actually likely to be difficult to do this economically, particularly in an environment where demand is declining. There are other options available to utilise the coal resource. Solid Energy historically have done some trials in terms of underground coal gasification. I won't go into the details of those, it's in my evidence, but essentially it's a way of burning the coal in ground, producing synthetic gas that can then be used for energy generation. Although I will note that depending on how much of the coal is burnt in ground, surface settlement effects would still be expected to result. Now, depending on how you deal with that, depending on how much of the coal is burnt, how much is left behind, where your injection and production wells are, it may be that underground coal gasification is not necessarily incompatible with surface structures. But clearly that's something that would require a bit of study before you could actually determine whether that was the case or not. In terms of the evidence prepared by Mr. Ferguson and Gary Gray on behalf of the Ralph estate, Mr. Ferguson and I are actually in agreement about the larger part of the issues facing mine development. We do look at some quite different scenarios. The scenario that I was faced with was, okay, let's look at what was being considered in the 80s, the state coal proposal. Mr. Ferguson looked at the 2015 Solid Energy proposal. They have some differences, but essentially the areas where we disagree are that is in relation to coal demand. Mr. Ferguson said that while there is a reduction in demand, and we both agreed around that, he suggested that the demand, the ongoing demand from Glenbrook Steel Mill would serve to prop up coal demand within the North Waikato. I'm not sure if that assumption holds weight, particularly with the timelines that he's provided. There's certainly been information in the past few months around the troubles that BlueScope Steel are facing in relation to Glenbrook. And I think that considering that that demand will stay the same or will look the same as it does now in 10 or 15 years' time, I don't know that that's necessarily valid. In terms of the technical feasibility of an open cast, Mr. Ferguson said that he believes it is technically feasible, but he's actually stepped away from making comment on the environmental effects because he believes that's outside his area of expertise, and that's fine. But what it means is there's actually a very narrow view taken on the technical feasibility, and those relate to groundwater drawdown. Groundwater drawdown, as both Mr. Stafford and Mr. Spate have just provided evidence on, will be significant, and it will present significant ground surface settlements in meters. And I think that you can't set that aside when you're saying whether something is technically feasible or not, in my view. The final point where we have a bit of a divergence of opinion is an offset that Mr. Ferguson and Mr. Gray provide for the constrained pit, which they refer to as essentially how the resource would be constrained if the APL development went ahead. And they provide a 100-metre offset to the south of Tahuna Road. It's not clear what that offset relates to, but actually it presents a significant volume of coal that they include as the sterilised volumes even though it actually doesn't underlie the APL site, or in fact is required for the overburden cut slopes. So the nature of that would need to be assessed further. So that's the summary of my evidence, sir. I'm happy to take any questions if you have any.
Thank you, Mr. Lyons. Mr. Cooney?
No question, thank you.
Mr. Mark?
Very interesting, sir, but no questions from me.
Mr. Fulton?
No, I don't have any questions. Thank you.
No, and I have no questions either. Thank you very much, Mr. Lyons.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Berry, we've got, can you just give us we're sort of probably approaching time for a break. I think you've got Mr. Desai and Mr. O'Brien in this tranche. Do you want to complete them, or would you like to take a break now? We're happy either way.
Moving on hand, sir. We may have to take a break now, and I'll talk to Mr. Desai about skipping over his summary as well.
That would be helpful, I think. Can I just ask before we do break how you believe that we're tracking in terms of the presentation of your case as a whole?
Sir, I think we're about where I would have expected to be. I mean, we're obviously in a territory in which it's highly technical and not a lot of questions, but I don't think there's any doubt at all. I think we've done 10 witnesses now, that we'll finish by within the allotted time tomorrow.
Okay, well we'll review that at the end of the day.
Okay.
All right, we'll adjourn till 3:20. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Are you there, Mr. Berry? Is Mr. Berry?
Yep.
Yeah. Just whenever you're ready. Thanks, Mr. Berry.
Thank you. Sorry about that, sir. I didn't realise I was muted.
No, that's all right.
So the next witness in this tranche is AJ Desai in relation to flooding issues.
Thank you.
He's on the line somewhere.
Afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
I'm Ajay Desai. I'm a 3-water engineer with Woods, and I have undertaken the detailed flood analysis for the development, which is in collaboration with WRC. The flood modeling and associated reporting has been reviewed by Waikato Regional Council reviewer, and all the additional modeling that has been worked on has been shared with WRC, which covers any detailed modeling for stop bank breach and sensitivity analysis. All the major issues and concerns were discussed and resolved as a part of the experts conferencing session. These are documented in the joint witness statement. The increase in water levels within Lake Waikiri has been agreed by all experts as negligible, and the flood effect on neighboring properties is negligible. This has also been documented in the joint witness statement. In addition, there were some minor issues raised by Mr. Bashir in his evidence, which have been discussed subsequently and considered as resolved in my opinion. These are documented in my rebuttal evidence. These included some minor corrections to wordings and around setting finished floor levels or building floor levels. These have been discussed and agreed with Waikato Regional Council, hence considered resolved. It has also been agreed that there are no flooding issues outstanding which cannot be resolved at a detailed design or consenting stage. Overall, my view remains that flooding does not preclude rezoning application of APL.
Gosh, that was short and sweet. Thank you, Mr. Desai. Let's just see if there's any questions. Mr. Fulton?
No, I don't have any questions. Thank you.
Mr. Marg?
No questions from me. Thank you very much. Very clear, very simple.
Thank you.
Mr. Cooney?
Yeah, thanks for that. It's now agreed that the building platform levels would be 8.5. Is that right?
So these will be included in the plan provisions by Mr. Oliver. I have made a note of these. My summary statement, which I'm trying to search. These will be 8.5 for residential properties, 8.3 for any non-residential, 8.2 for commercial properties.
Okay, and there's no dispute over that.
No, we have adopted the numbers that came from the council.
Okay, thank you.
And I've got no questions either. Thank you, Mr. Desai. Thank you for your evidence.
Now, Carl O'Brien on the site contamination. Yeah.
I should probably declare for the record that Mr. O'Brien was employed by my firm during his formative years. So if he does a good job, I'll take the credit. If he doesn't, nothing to do with me. No pressure, Mr. O'Brien.
Thank you, sir.
Welcome.
Welcome. I will jump straight in to what we did, which is basically in direct accordance with the Ministry for the Environment guidelines. We undertook a desktop assessment of the whole property to determine any risks of contamination. And then based from that, we undertook a detailed investigation of the stage 1A footprint. The preliminary desktop investigation found pretty much what you'd expect with an old farming environment. There was building materials in broken and degraded conditions, some use of lead-based paint, a little bit of refuse discharge in terms of farm dumps across the land. We also found a little bit of contamination associated with the stock effluent ponds. And alongside, we also had fertilizer storage and hydrocarbon storage on site. Based on that, we undertook soil sampling directly across the stage 1A footprint and found very little impacts to soil that would preclude development under the commercial industrial land use standard. We found one small area of lead in soil that presents a potential risk to environmental receptors, but at a very limited level. And for that, we recommended vertical mixing of soil to dilute the concentrations within that footprint. Based on that, we're pretty confident that there's no significant contamination issues that would preclude the development with the scope and scale. We note that the requirements of the National Environmental Standard for soil contamination will still need to be met across all stages of the development. However, that does eventuate over time, and that will entail basically targeted detailed investigation to each stage as it progresses. The scope and scale of the proposed development gives us quite a lot of leeway for managing soil contamination on site by virtue of the differing sensitivity levels. We'll have some ability to use low-level impacted soil within recreational and commercial industrial landscape plantings, with very limited provision for the residential aspects that are likely just to have minor heavy metal issues associated with prolonged superphosphate use. In the event that we can't contain all of that soil on site, then obviously there's fairly proximate landfills that can deal with high levels of soil contamination or any miscellaneous refuse that's encountered over time. Based on that, each stage of the investigations will be followed up with the necessary reporting to District and Regional Council, and that will also be subject to their review process to make sure those contamination matters meet the requirements of the NES and the regional plan.
Thanks, Mr. O'Brien. Let's see if there's any questions. Mr. Cooney?
No, thank you.
Mr. Marg?
Just one, Mr. O'Brien, on the basis that you're talking about, obviously the contaminants found is minor, but noting that Mr. Spates talked about there would be a significant amount of infill that would have to be imported in to lift the compaction and lifting the ground. Wouldn't that reduce any or mitigate any problems or concerns that may be raised?
It would depend on the exact nature of contamination within that footprint, but yes, basically it would give us a cap and contain methodology to address contamination in raising that up. Obviously, we still need to ensure protection of groundwater and protection of environmental receptors, but yes, it can be utilised to cap and contain.
Okay, thank you.
So would it be fair to say that there's nothing that you found in your investigation that was unexpected? And similarly, if you'd gone to some other site in that general area that had been used for farming operations for decades, you'd have found something similar, or you'd have expected to have found something similar. Is that a fair summary?
Yes, that's a very fair summary. It's all pretty consistent land use across those farms, particularly in the northern Waikato where superphosphate is used relatively heavily. Most farms have hydrocarbons on site, and most old businesses old buildings have utilised asbestos up until the late 1980s.
Okay, no, that's helpful. Thank you very much. Thanks, Mr. O'Brien.
No worries. Thank you all.
Mr. Berry.
Clearly, sir, that witness is a credit to you.
You'll have to wait and see until our decision comes out to find out our view on that, Mr. Berry.
Sir.
Possibly comment.
Mr. Gainston, you don't need to hear from.
No, thank you.
And so we are now moving into the fourth tranche of evidence which relates to infrastructure provision and servicing. And the first of those witnesses is Robert White of GHD.
Kia ora, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mr. White. Just when you're ready, thanks.
So my area is the bulk water and wastewater servicing of the development site. It's pre-identified. The work is being looked at in 3 stages. Stage 1 is service from on-site provision. Stage 2 then is fed from Huntley, from both water and wastewater scenario. Stage 3 is the ultimate, which is aligned with the Mid-Waikato servicing strategy, with wastewater being serviced from the wastewater treatment plant at Huntley and a new water treatment plant at Te Kolwhita supplying into Huntley. Capacity is available within the Huntley system for both water and wastewater for the stage 2 works. But it's noted that the APL accept that there will be a provision to restrict connections until there's capacity to supply, so that development won't go ahead of the provision to supply water and service the wastewater. And one last thing, in answer to a question in the S42, the rezoning of the land from the retail to industrial will only have an insignificant impact on water demand and wastewater volumes produced.
That's it.
That's a summary of my...
Yes, it certainly is. It is a summary. No, that's fine. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be flippant, but thank you. That's clear. Let's see if there's any questions. Mr. Fulton?
No, I don't have any questions on that. I think it's I'll further develop as we go through. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Marg?
Not from me, thank you.
Mr. Cooney?
Yes, just can you provide an overview? And I've read all this stuff, but I just got to put it all together again. Just an overview of stage 2 and stage 3 with respect to wastewater and water. And I'll just give you what I think I read. With stage 2, which is for a period of how many years?
I forget the exact number of years, but it's a interaction there between the growth and the capacity available within the system.
Yeah, okay.
So it's not a precise number.
All right. Well, for stage 2, you rely on the capacity subject to bringing it up to standard of the Huntley wastewater treatment plant for wastewater.
Correct. Yes.
And for water, you will rely on what?
So the initial stage is to rely on the capacity of the Huntley system.
And then on, but the Huntley water system, does that need a new consent at some point? 2026, I think I read.
The water take consent from memory, and I can go and have a quick look at this. It is much longer than the wastewater consent.
Okay.
So it's actually staged. So the water take consent actually increases over time. And from memory, it's significantly further into the future than 2029.
So when does the, I know the water supply, there was a connection that needs a consent pretty quick in 2023 somewhere.
The Colford Water Association consent expires 30 June 2024.
That's right, yeah. And there's a backup agreement with Te Kawhata. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. And what is the backup agreement to cover?
I say that I'll leave that to others to comment, in that I haven't been directly involved with that conversation.
All right. Okay. Okay. So I'm asking the question of the wrong man. Is that right?
I see that what I am aware of is that there is an agreement in place to let's say here's Mr. Gaze to provide APL with additional volume of water.
Okay. Well, maybe Mr. Payne can explain it when he comes to give us evidence. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks. I've just got one question, I think, Mr. White. Can you explain to me in simple terms what the compliance challenges are at the Huntley wastewater treatment plant and what it is that's required to fix them?
Say that the wastewater process isn't my area of specialism. It is identified that the treatment plant is non-compliant. We know that. Who's if you're not the person to ask, who is? Let's see who's the person to ask. That there are technologies available to upgrade that treatment plant.
No, I know that. I want to know what the problems with the current plant have. People have, variously said there's compliance issues. Mr. Gay said his understanding was that they were all pretty straightforward and easy to fix. But I don't know that we have any information from anybody that helps us understand what the problem is and how easy it is to fix. So I'm looking for some guidance from you or someone else, please.
Well, certainly the ponds have a serious volume of sludge accumulated, such that they have a reduction in treatment capacity. And certainly in conversations with water care, that is a priority to look at desludging those ponds to increase the capacity of the ponds back to the original capacity and therefore increase treatment capacity.
And capacity and efficacy, as I understand it, is that right?
Yes. Yeah.
And is that, in your understanding, that's the extent of the problem at the moment?
It is certainly a major part of the problem.
And the rest of them are straightforward to fix, are they?
They can be fixed, certainly, yes.
Yeah, that's not quite the question. The question is whether they're readily amenable to being fixed or not. And if you don't know, just say you don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
Don't make it up.
Yeah.
I think it would be helpful for you or somebody to actually give us a bit of clarity around that at some point. Not necessarily because anything turns on it, but we would like to know. I think, it's been variously mentioned that there's this compliance issue that's been ongoing for quite a long time at Huntley, and there doesn't seem to be much progress in getting it fixed. And I think we'd be reassured to know one way or the other whether that's just because it hasn't been done or because it can't be done because it's too difficult.
See I was listening this morning, and I thought that the gentleman covered it with water care strategy to
well, no, with respect, he didn't. He said that he understood that there were discussions with water care and that everything could be fixed, and he understood it to be relatively straightforward, but he deferred to someone with the technical expertise and the technical knowledge. It may be something that Mr. Bradley can help us with. I think Mr. Bradley. Or if someone else can answer it for us, just, I don't want to let it hang, and if it's a non-event, so be it, but I'd like to know the answer. So if someone can answer it now, that would be helpful.
And I'd
Yeah,
like
Dr.
to,
Mitchell, it's Mark here from the District Council.
Yes, fine, thank you.
Helping with this matter. So the main issue at the moment that's hampering capacity of the plant is the desludging, which has already been alluded to. The reason why there hasn't been solutions, or why the plant isn't compliant and doesn't have a great deal of capacity at the moment, is because we've been waiting for the Mid-Waikato servicing strategy to come up with an integrated solution for the Mid-Waikato. So obviously you can understand the council wanting to hold back on investing in a plant before there's an integrated solution along with Te Kauwhata put into place.
And what's the nature of the non-compliance?
I'll have to come back to you on that.
Two key areas. One is nitrogen, and the other is suspended solids.
So when you say capacity, you don't necessarily mean hydraulic capacity. You mean things like retention time and the ability for there to be enough capacity in the system in order to treat the water properly. Have I understood that correctly?
So certainly, the increase in volume in the ponds increases the retention time, and therefore increases the treatment time. Aids settlement.
That's the issue. It's not that the pipes are too small or that there's not enough capacity. It's just that it's not maintained properly or sufficiently to enable its design capacity to be utilised properly.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
All right. That's fine.
you need bigger ponds, do you?
Mr. Chairman.
Sorry. Go ahead, Jim.
I'd be willing to help at this point, as you said you would like to clear the matter up. Yeah. And I do know the Huntley consent reasonably well, because I was in part when it was issued. The problem.
So it's your fault.
No, it is a very clever consent actually, in that the nitrogen and phosphorus mass load is balanced against a composite against Narrawahia, which allows the opportunity to do the nitrogen and phosphorus at one or both plants. That as Mr. White has just said, I understand it's a suspended solids and a nitrogen problem. There are many ways that can be fixed, either as a short term or a long term. Desludging the ponds and the circulation patterns will help the suspended solids. A bolt-on filtration unit is a possibility, and done in a number of places, even to the stage of membrane filtrations, and Watercare has one of those on a pond. Also, there is ballasted flocculation, a proprietary type device that in fact precipitates out a certain amount of the algae, and therefore taking with it the phosphorus and nitrogen. Then there's the possibility of a modular development of membrane filters, etc., that could lead to the future plant along the lines of the MWSS report. So the proven technologies are there. Upgrading ponds is something we've done a lot of, and New Zealand has done a lot of in the wastewater industry. I trust that helps.
Yeah, I think it does. So the short order is that provided there was a will to do it, it would not be particularly onerous or difficult. Is that a fair summary?
Feasible, technically proven is my evidence comments.
Yes, thank you.
In the recent study, it says there should be a new plant constructed. Was it to service Huntley and Ohinewai? Is that right?
That is proposed in Waikato Watercare's MWSS, and in that report they give the type of plant they've based their estimates and their planning on, notwithstanding, of course, consent issue. And just to tidy up the question, Mr. Chairman, about volume of the consent, there is adequacy, more than adequate volume in that consent to take both growth in Huntley and the Ohinewai development through to the expiry in 2029.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Bradley. That's helpful. And no further questions for you either. Thank you, Mr. White. Thanks for your evidence.
Mr. Chairman, I've got David Gaze here who would be able to address the nature of the arrangement with the Te Kauwhata water people, if you wanted to hear from him on that.
No, I don't. Not from my point of view. Not at the moment. I mean, it may be something that we can address once we've heard the rest of the evidence. But I don't think at the moment that's going to particularly assist. I was just trying to get a clear understanding of the compliance issues at Huntley and what it is that's necessary to address those in the shorter term. And I think that's been clarified.
Appreciate that, sir. Thank you.
Okay.
Our next witness is Ben Payne, who's addressing erosion and sediment control issues. He should be on the line.
All right. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thanks, Mr. Payne.
All right. I won't read through my whole evidence or the summary, just address the three main points. The overall earthworks required for the job for APL land is about 2.5 million cubic metres of cut to fill, of which 2 million cubes is imported. About 500,000 cubes will be cut from along Tahuna Road and Lumsden Road edges, which were one of the things you brought up with Mr. Spate for reuse on site, and the rest will be coming in. In terms of the preload coming in, so additional fill will need to be bought for preload as well, but that could be reused in stages across the site, so it's not a huge extra volume on top of the cut fill volumes. For erosion and sediment control, generally the site can be developed using the Waikato Regional Council standards, TR 0902, and they and it's proposed for doing that four-step erosion sediment control methodology to be used for the site, using both structural and non-structural control measures, including a team approach, using erosion sediment control measures toolbox, which will use controls identified in Waikato Regional Council TR 0902, as well as newer innovative devices and erosion sediment control measures. Be a last line of defence for additional protection from waterways, and a monitoring program to ensure that the controls that are put in place are working effectively, and whether any better measures can be put in place to improve the system. That's about it. Any questions?
Right. Thank you, Mr. Payne. Mr. Kearney?
Yeah, 2 million cubic metres, is that a substantial amount of infill in terms of other developments?
The Holiday Highway up in that's getting built in from north of Auckland to Warkworth. That's Puhoi to Warkworth. That's about 7 million cubes. Another big development in Auckland, Long Bay development, which is 2,500 lots, which was about 2.7 million cubes. So it's sort of in the region of a similar amount of earthworks for developments of this size.
And where do you get the fill from in this area?
There'll be a range of sources. There'll be local hills that farmers want moved off their land. There'll be overburden from quarries or cheap products from quarries which they can't sell in the quantities they need to on the market for roading and things like that. So there'll be a range of different sources.
And sort of truck numbers you're talking about?
Well, for the initial part of the development, truck movements, it will really depend on the size of each stage and when it can be brought in. Yeah. I think the transportation engineer have worked out some numbers for the first couple of stages. Will be truck and trailer. Once the rail siding's been built, then there's the option to bring stuff in with rail, which will take those truck numbers off the road. Where local hills from farmers can be used, then potentially there's off-road solutions for bringing that through farms and so on. So there's a range of different places to get the fill.
Okay. You engineers can make things happen, in other words.
Yeah. Dirt can be moved.
It can be moved.
Okay.
That's it, Mr. Kearney?
Yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Fulton?
Yeah, I just want to check all this preload and stuff. It'll stay on site. It's only got one movement in.
Well, with the preload, we're looking at about using about 4 hectares worth of preload and then moving that around the site. So 4 hectares is about 200,000 cubes. So that comes in at the start, and then it just gets, as areas get finished and require preload, that gets moved on to the next area. It does its time doing the preload and then moves to the next area that needs preloading. So it'll just move around the site, and more than likely that'll get incorporated into the last stage of earthworks as fill.
Yeah, I can understand the consent process for allowing this to be brought in. I can imagine complaints from neighbours with truckloads coming in here, but it's going to be done in stages. So you'll have a comparatively short period of time where it'll be loaded and then stopped and loaded again and stopped later on. Is that the way it's going to work?
Generally, the earthwork season runs from October to April, so that'll generally when it's coming in. There may be some opportunities to bring stuff and tip it on site outside those months, and then to be moved later. So that'll be all agreed as part of the resource consents for the individual stages. I know for the first stage, we're looking at putting in a haul road from Tahuna Road to bypass the residents on Lumsden.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Mark?
Yes.
Nothing from me, thank you. It sounds like a mammoth proposition just on itself.
Just one question from me. When I was listening to Mr. Spate's evidence, and I asked him to put the geotechnical challenges into context, and he said it was, these aren't his words, but you know, that it required some fairly careful attention to detail in order to make it work. How would you summarise and describe the complexity of the erosion and sediment control works needed here?
Well, given the site is relatively flat, it means there'll be less erosion during earthworks operations. So it's probably less difficult in that respect. But given that there's sandy materials, peaty materials, clay materials, and then depending on what kind of imported materials are being used, they will have to be treated slightly differently when controlling. So it's really having that adaptive plan that changes with the materials, with the season, in order to make sure there's no discharges into the receiving environment. So,
but is there anything particularly? I totally get that different materials need handling differently, but there's nothing about this proposal, or the materials, or the topography, or anything else that poses any particular challenges here that wouldn't apply generally through the district. Is that a fair comment?
I don't think there's anything different from a similar earthworks projects here or elsewhere. I guess the proximity to the local waterways means that you've got to make sure the controls are 100% right, so you're not discharging, because as soon as it discharges, it'll get to the receiving environment. But the plan we put in place, or what we will put in place as part of the resource consents, having the team approach, making sure we're engaging with stakeholders all throughout the earthworks, having the using good, better, best practice when coming up with the devices, having that backup control with the last line of defence, and a monitoring program means we're not going to have any issues.
Okay. Yeah. No, that's fine. That's helpful. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Payne. Nothing further from me. Mr. Berry.
Thank you, sir. So the next witness following that up is Pranil Warren from Woods, who's addressing stormwater management.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'll keep this relatively short. With respect to stormwater management and stormwater management systems, there are no outstanding matters as I understand it. Agreement with all matters was met during expert conferencing, as is documented in the joint witness statement. No items were raised in the section 42A rebuttal report. Overall, my opinion remains that stormwater does not preclude zoning sought by APR. Any questions?
Sorry, Mr. Wadden, we lost you there for a moment.
I can repeat that if you want.
Given that you didn't say very much at all, it's a shame that we missed that we missed some of it.
Okay, so now what I was saying was, with respect to stormwater management systems, there are no outstanding matters, as I understand it. Agreement of all matters was met during expert conferencing and is documented in the joint witness statement. No items were raised in the section 42A rebuttal report. Overall, my opinion remains that stormwater does not preclude rezoning sought by APR.
All right, and just along the line of questioning from the other water-related witnesses, yep. There's nothing revolutionary or out of the box in relation to stormwater management on this site. Is that an accurate summary?
Yeah, that's an accurate summary. I would say, you know, the measures in place are probably above and beyond what would be normal practice. In most instances, I mean, we're using, you know, a multi-stage approach that's well beyond what you're required to do as a minimum.
Is that because of the complexity and challenges of the site, or you just want to do a, you know, best in show sort of an approach here?
A best in show, but also a better outcome for the receiving environment, which is hypertrophic. So the environment downstream isn't great. So there's an opportunity here to make it better, and it goes along with the conversations that have been had with iwi and co to do that.
All right, no, very good, thank you. Mr. Cooney, any questions from you?
No, I've got no questions. Thank you.
Mr. Fulton.
No, I've got no questions. Thank you. Thank you very
Mr.
much.
Mark?
None from me, thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Warden. That's very helpful. Thank you for your evidence.
Thank you.
We're going like train, Mr. Chairman. That completes the fourth tranche of evidence, and we now turn to the effects witnesses. The first of whom is Cameron Inda, dealing with traffic.
All right. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Excellent. So this may take a little bit longer, I suspect, but depends on your questions in the end. So
I think given that I mean, this is a fairly, I don't know if controversial topic's quite the right way to express it, but it'll do for now. I think it's worth you being reasonably thorough in what you summarise. You don't need to read out tracts of material, but please take the time to make sure that you've highlighted what you consider are the key things that we need to be specifically aware of.
Okay.
And I think that goes particularly with your supplementary statement that whilst we've read it, it's not resonating with us yet,
sure.
Given we haven't had much time with it, if you understand my point.
Yes, yeah, completely. Okay, well, I guess my summary statement, starting with that, really just hit the key issues that had been raised both in conferencing and in evidence of Ms. Naomi McMinn, and Mr. Robert Swears, and Mr. Vincent Gale. I hope I got that surname right, from Waikato Regional Council. So my summary started, we touched a bit on the trip generations that we'd used in our calculations. I was of the opinion in the conferencing that we were on the conservative side, primarily on the basis of the number of external trips being the Waikato regional model sort of predicting somewhere in the order of 80% trips being external. And also the fact that the Waikato regional model on which the modelling is based for the intersections it does not allow for any rail trips. It doesn't allow for public transport trips. It doesn't allow for walking and cycling trips internally within the site. So it just assumes all trips effectively are on the road, which obviously isn't the case. However, we've worked on that basis, and therefore there's an element of conservatism in that, certainly in those numbers. Furthermore, we added some sensitivity testing on the trip generation rates for industrial or commercial, up to 20% extra to test. I guess the sensitivity of the proposals that would come up with, and of course then there was the removal of the DFO component, which primarily affects the PM peak trips rather than the AM peak. We had assessed the DFO on general commercial, previously general commercial and retail rates, so we're actually quite high in themselves anyway at 58 people per hectare. But that's how we had originally assessed it, and so therefore taking that off and replacing that with industrial, we're at around about 37.5 on average people per hectare. So you get a net reduction of about 170 vehicles per hour in the peak. So that worked in favour ultimately of where we're heading with capacity upgrades. And one capacity upgrade that we had recommended and saw that it was quite possible to have to do is the Lumsden Road, Hoona Road roundabout, increasing that to 2 lanes exiting, turning right from Lumsden Road. But with the removal of the DFO and the removal therefore of that traffic in the PM peak, adding to the industrial people leaving the site in the PM peak, ultimately that ended up meaning that it's unlikely that that roundabout will need to be upgraded now with the removal of the DFO component.
Mr. Chairman, I wonder whether can we put up a photo plan of the area, because there's a number of intersections and that type of thing that are coming up.
I think that's a good idea.
Have we got a map there of the intersections and you know?
I don't have one to hand myself, but I'm sure our team does. If not, I can find one quickly. Where would that be, Ronnie? It's not appended to my evidence, my summary, that's all.
Well, even your master plan, your latest version might help, just to show us where everything is.
Okay.
Mr. Berry, are you able to help us there?
Can't hear you. That's better.
I don't think we can from here, given the setup that we have.
Oh, okay.
I think if you have the plan available electronically, Mr. Bell can wave his magic wand and allow you to share it with us. Do you have it handy, Mr. Berry, or is it not on your system as such?
It may take us a few minutes, sir, so
Well, if Mr. Inder can refer to either his primary evidence and which attachment he thinks it would be useful, I can probably find it.
Jonathan Brookhazen here. I've just got it up on my screen, which I can share.
Thank you.
It's just saying the host has disabled participant screen sharing, whoever's administrator.
Yeah, that will. Mr. Bell, can you?
Tell them it should be.
It should be working now.
Jonathan's got it.
I don't think we're wanting to make edits in our PDF, that's all. There we go.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Right. Still hear me okay?
Yes, thanks.
Great. I probably should take control, shouldn't I, somehow, so I can see this. Request remote control, all right. So you can see my cursor here on the Lumsden Road to Hoona Road intersection.
Yep.
So that is the roundabout I was just referring to before in terms of previously in the transport assessment report and in my initial evidence, we were talking about the need to increase the capacity of that at some point in the future, around the point where where the development generates close to about 1,000 vehicles per hour. With the removal of this DFO from this area, you still see my cursor?
Yep.
Yep. From this area, that's looking unlikely to be needed now. It's still possible, but it's looking unlikely. But we have recommended that there is at least a provision in the rules that allows for an ITA that assesses if and when that would be needed. So I'll just refer back to my summary statement now. So I guess there's 4 key elements that we are recommending as part of the transportation mitigation measures. First is, well, there's the rail siding, new rail siding connection to the North Island Main Trunk, including a localised realignment of Lumsden Road for safety at the level crossing. So that is expected that there will be significant volumes of freight over time removed to and from the site. However, again, as I'll stress again, that we have not removed that traffic from the network in our assessment, albeit that it's likely that that rail siding will go ahead at some point. So we're proposing 4 new access intersections. If we refer to this map, we can see here on Hoona Road, access 23 and 21. So 21 is a proposed 3-leg roundabout. 23 is a proposed left in and left out only intersection, which simplifies the movements there. And the reason we've done that is because of access 22 to the more minor road, Lumsden Road, and we can get full movements there. And there's no need to have right turns in or out of access 23, in my opinion. The other 4th intersection is number 22. So both 22 and, sorry, they've both got 22s on them. It's not quite right. But anyway, this one here where my cursor is, that and this one here on Lumsden Roads, these 2 are servicing primarily this industrial and manufacturing area. The residential is primarily in and out of this roundabout, although of course there are internal connections.
There is also an access into the service area, into the service station area, isn't there?
That's shown, and certainly we're proposing that be the case. Although the notation on the structure plan is that it's to be confirmed location and the need for at the time of resource consent.
Okay.
Now, an internal road network, there's an array of different road cross sections. We've purposely tried to keep a low speed environment, a network that has got a high degree of connectivity, particularly for walking and cycling between the areas of employment and living, which passes through these areas of wetlands, stormwater detention ponds and reserve. So we've got an internal connection from this part of the residential to the industrial, and likewise from this part here through the neighbourhood centre to the industrial. So internally, high degree of walking and cycling connectivity, should be reasonably low car use for getting to work unless it's raining. So the other thing is external connections. So of course we've got the interchange which exists. There has been talk by New Zealand Transport Agency that it was not designed for this in mind, and of course it wasn't, because it was designed back in the late 1990s. It was constructed in the early 2000s. However, my assessment has demonstrated that there is no capacity problem with what the traffic that's expected to be generated by this site. We believe that there is sufficient capacity at both intersections. So the primary issue that has really been canvassed about lately is the issue of walking and cycling safety. at the interchange. One of the key aspect from APL's point of view in this regard is that there is a separate proposed walking and cycling bridge across the North Island Main Trunk Railway and the expressway, completely separate from the interchange. And that, in my view, connects the key desire lines for walking and cycling externally from the site to one, the school, two, onwards to Huntley. Huntley is about 9 kilometres to the south, and in my view, quite easy to cycle, certainly from what I'm seeing, and as I said in my rebuttal evidence, that there is a lot of people now cycling 10 kilometres or more with e-bikes that have become popular, and it's only likely to get more popular. So while I accept that a southern connection, as shown where my cursor is, does not address all desire lines for walking and cycling to the community, in my opinion, it will address the vast majority. And certainly is significantly safer than cycling across the rail overbridge, which is very narrow and problematic, difficult, well, in fact, near impossible to widen. And also the interchange itself, where you've got on and off ramps on both sides, you've got a roundabout on the west side, and you've got a fairly narrow bridge over the expressway, certainly not suitable for walking. And I'd say only suitable for confident cyclists. So when we have been looking at this very issue of walking and cycling connectivity, recognising at the very start that this was going to be a key issue and that a good, safe and high quality outcome needed to be found. We looked at a northern option for crossing the expressway and rail. We looked at options for crossing pedestrians and cyclists at the interchange, and the southern option here, which was more aligned with the school. So jumping to, I guess, the issues that have been raised primarily by Mr. Swears and Ms. McMinn, is that both believe cyclists are going to be at significant risk at the interchange, and therefore replacement of the bridge, the rail over bridge, and most likely replacement of the expressway bridge would be needed to mitigate that. Both very significant infrastructure upgrades. But the complexity of that is somewhat missed in simple statements like replace those bridges. They both are very significant undertakings. Start with the rail. So, and this is, I guess, referring to my supplementary evidence. So the supplementary evidence filed on Friday was based on the fact that we'd taken out a topographical survey and picked up actual points of where the abutments were, the gradients of the centre of the lanes, and also what was the other thing? The alignment of the southbound off-ramp, the southbound one being this one here, which is tight for trucks turning left towards the site, particularly large trucks. And the issue there being that some trucks cross the centre line at present to turn left to avoid their trailers snagging or scraping the abutment of the rail overbridge. So the question then is, well, how then can that be mitigated? In my view, replacing the rail overbridge is one option, but in my view would also only add to the safety risk to pedestrians and cyclists, particularly cyclists, as it would encourage more cycling across the bridge. But we still wouldn't have addressed any of the other safety issues at the interchange, of which there are a number, and not easily fixed. So it would undermine the much safer, the much more direct towards the school and Huntley, the solution that we're proposing to the south of the interchange. And so in my view, whatever solution we come up with for addressing trucks crossing the centre line, if indeed you consider that it is a significant issue, which I don't consider that it is, then in my view, the solution must avoid encouraging walking and cycling across the interchange.
How common is the issue of trucks having to manoeuvre by crossing the centre line to get round tight bends? Well, this presumably isn't the only place in the country where big trucks have to be a bit delicate in getting around tight corners.
Yeah, that's a very good point. It's an interesting one because the further investigations that we did with the topographical survey, and then I was able to come back to the office and run some more tracking paths on with using actual data rather than sort of scaled and aerial photos, which were actually quite accurate, but not as accurate as topo. What we're finding is actually trucks don't always need to cross over the centre line. It is only the 19.5 HPMV, high productivity motor vehicle, semi-trailers that actually would need to put a front wheel, the front right wheel, over the centre line by about 0.5 metre in order to come past the abutment of the rail overbridge and still have about a 0.5 metre clearance envelope. And we work on a basis of about a 0.5 metre clearance envelope to curved structures and things like that because they're travelling slow and they can. But the thing is, at the moment, because there isn't much traffic at all opposing them, and it's easy and it's almost a bit of lazy driving, trucks will just pull right on out onto the other side, sometimes take up half the lane and clear the abutment with 1 metre or so, or even more to spare, because they can, and there's no negative outcome, so to speak. And I accept that as traffic increases as a result of this development, that would become harder to do. So the modelling that we've done has actually proven and given me confidence that if trucks either just wait for the vehicles that's coming in the opposite direction, which I've observed that quite a few do as well, then they can make the turn and, albeit slowly, avoid the abutment on the rail overbridge. So I'll just refer back to my summary because I'm possibly starting to waffle. So okay, so the other thing that we just need to consider if we're raising that, if we're replacing that bridge, and another reason why I suggest that it's not a good solution and it's not an appropriate solution for this situation, is that it is very old. It would need to be widened and raised in order to meet Kiwi Rail's clearance envelope requirements for electrification and for third rail track. Now, we've done bridges in the past where we've had to do this, and because there is space, it's not the worst thing. But in this particular location where you've got the rail overbridge so close to the existing interchange and the interchange abutments, raising that bridge is a significant issue. That means a major alteration to the ramps, but not only that, it affects your sight lines looking from the southbound off ramp towards the roundabout. So you've solved one problem, but you create more. So the solution, one of the options that I came up with in my supplementary statement that you will have seen, but probably not fully digested, is there's two things, and I might just take control of this if that's okay, Jonathan. How do I get this? Request. If Jonathan's there, could you just unshare your screen, please? And I'll try to share my one. So can that be seen?
No. Not at the moment.
How about that? Sorry.
Now something's popping up now.
The blue button that says share. So this was a photo I took late last week with just an example of a truck that's turned across out over the centre line by about half a metre, and you can see the trailer tracking around. Now this is quite a long truck, it's a car transporter, and he'll continue past there with I noticed with quite a reasonable gap. This is the abutment that I'm referring to as hard and fast. There is no structural solution to replace or to widen that, given the type of structure, which is apparently called a Super T structure. I'm no structural engineer, but our structural engineer did have a good look at it and said you're really, the only option here is to find another solution or replace the bridge. So I looked at it further and also noticed that this guardrail here is tying into that abutment, whereas on the opposite side, can you see my cursor on that?
Yes.
Yep. On the opposite side, the guardrail is tying into the wing wall. The abutment's actually over here. This is your bridge wing wall. Relocating the guardrail here could give a little bit more room for those drivers who don't quite anticipate the turn correctly and are concerned about scraping. That guardrail could feasibly be moved and tied into that wing wall. Doesn't fix the abutment pinch point, does give a bit more space. So that's what I've been talking about there, and this is another view of it.
Yep.
So you can see there, it would give a little bit more tracking room for trailers that is tracking very close to that guardrail.
Okay, no, that's clear, thanks.
The other solution, which is, again, I guess I'll reiterate my point after this, but this is another solution that we also took topographical survey information of the embankment for this southbound off-ramp. Now this is a fairly steep bank, but there is a reasonable bit of land in here that could lend itself to some relocation of the southbound ramp, basically offsetting it away from directly opposite the on-ramp. It would require a retaining wall and is certainly no small task. But what this is showing, if I can just zoom in there, here's your abutment point. It does show that this is the HPMV semi-trailer, so they're 19.5 meters long, 4-axle. The last axle has a tag axle that turns. So steering axle, and this is the swept path. And we can see here the blue line is a half a meter from the green line being the body, the swept path of the body. And so you've got an extra half a meter either side, and we can demonstrate that just squeezes through without passing over that centre line through the realignment of that off-ramp. In my opinion, trucks are performing this safely now, even though they are often moving out onto that opposite lane because they can. And yes, I think there is less traffic at the moment than in the future, so yes, it will become a little more constrained in that regard. However, as I alluded to in my rebuttal evidence, I think it was, and even in the main evidence, we have tested the effect of trucks waiting longer at the stop line here than they otherwise would, up to 10 seconds for what we call a critical gap, looking for a gap, waiting for a vehicle to pass through and then making the turn. And the key point of that, checking that delay, is does that cause a queue that extends down the off-ramp to a point that becomes unsafe, because we need to have a deceleration length prior to the back of the queue for an approach speed of 110 kilometers per hour. What we found from that additional delay for trucks is that it has no, well, it has some effect, but it doesn't cause a critical queue for the 95th percentile queue length.
Does it get close to one? I mean, do you make it by, like a whisker, or have you got heaps of spare capacity if you were to do this?
My recollection is we have a fair bit of capacity left. I can't remember the exact numbers. I'd need to find them for you if you...
Oh no, but you're not on you haven't sort of just squeezed it in and gone, phew, it's just safe by a very small margin.
No, I've got the number of about 100 meters in my head.
Okay.
just check that though. Rolani, if you wouldn't mind. Thanks.
What about, can't you, I mean, there's various, okay, I know it's on ramps more than off ramps, but where you've got those pressure sensors that say there's a big truck coming, there's a traffic light going on and it stops the traffic. Can't you do something practical like that?
Potentially, yes, but there are going to be a number of big trucks. It's just how often does every big truck require it?
How often, I mean, what's the projection of how often they're coming?
There's one about, I think from the north side, every 2.5 to 3 minutes in the peak. So that's quite regular, but they're not all oversight or, you know, HPMVs.
Well, no, it's, yeah, understood. Okay.
So quite regularly, but certainly there are solutions in my mind like that. It's more creative solutions than just sort of, I must replace it. I think,
and I'm right in thinking that the specific traffic management strategies for this intersection and others would be looked at forensically under the microscope at the time of consenting, wouldn't it?
yes, they would, and I think the key point here is I'm demonstrating that there are alternative solutions. I think that's...
Oh, no, that's not a criticism. I mean, this is not the last time someone gets to look at how to configure these various intersections.
No, absolutely not. I just didn't want you to get to a point where you thought, well, there's only one solution here, and that's replacing.
Yeah, no, it's not a criticism. I just want to be very clear in my mind that there are, quotes, solutions with an S, and the opportunity for them to be looked at in more detail if the proposal were to be A, approved, and B, seeking consent.
Yeah, I believe so. And it's not like this suddenly just happens and there's 2,000 or 1,700 vehicles an hour suddenly on the road. This builds up over a matter of 10 plus years. And if problems start to become apparent, even if, say, you remove this, first of all, do this guardrail and see if that helps some matters initially. And if there are starting to become problems, then at least there's other measures up the sleeve there that council can and the NZTA can take a look at with the applicant.
Okay, thank you. No, that's fine.
Okay, so that's effectively what that supplementary evidence is all about, just demonstrating that I believe there are other options. But the key point being that I personally don't believe that the relocation of the southbound off-ramp is necessarily needed. And secondly, any solution that is done in future for if this becomes an issue, I don't believe we should be widening that bridge that would be to the point that it would encourage people to walk or cycle across this location. We're only going to create more safety issues in doing that, which none have any easy solution. I think we're better off to even, if possible, have signs that say cyclists cannot use this or strongly advise not to cross here, and there's a bridge 315 metres to the south to use.
Mr. Oliver can advise us in due course, but presumably at the time that resource consent is being sought and the various traffic management assessments are required, if it transpired in the future that in fact a new off-ramp was in fact necessary, the provisions in Mr. Oliver is proposing would, at least in theory, allow that as an outcome if it was shown to be necessary, wouldn't it?
Yes, it would. It would be collected in one of many ITAs that are going to be required to get resource consent as this development.
So you might not, your client might ultimately not like it when NZTA comes along and says, based on this ITA, the only way to fix this is to fix the off-ramp or rebuild the off-ramp or the overbridge or both. And the consequence of that is it's going to cost you a bit more than you thought. But that's not off the table, is it?
I don't think it's off the table. I just wouldn't want there to be some sort of major surprise that you'd have to replace the bridge, and that's the only thing that's been.
No. I'm not saying that. But if in the fullness of time, as you've suggested, this is going to take some time to manifest itself, assuming that the proposal was approved and it went ahead. And if that was the solution that in the fullness of time was shown to be necessary, for example, say the trucks get even bigger than what they are now, I don't know whether that's realistically feasible at all. But if the solution necessitated a widened bridge or a new bridge, isn't that the sort of things that traffic engineers and NZTA and so forth have to deal with all the time?
Yes, correct. Yes, there'd have to be some pretty innovative solutions at this location due to the
No, I understand. I understand
That's
that,
right,
and
yes,
you're
it's
simply
possible.
saying you don't like this one. But if in the fullness of time it was shown to be necessary, there's nothing in the provisions that Mr. Oliver's proposing to us that would prevent that being the outcome, is there?
True. No, that's the case.
And if Mr. Oliver can just confirm that for us at the appropriate time, that would be helpful.
How do you, one of the solutions, how do you create a new off-ramp?
It's not creating a new one. You're basically shifting realigning the top of the off-ramp here. So you'd put in a retaining wall and you'd create a new pavement through here. So you're keeping this alive in the time that while you're creating this, you're not creating a whole new off-ramp, you're just realigning the top of it. That does add some little increased safety benefit too, I'd add, that you're teeing up this intersection. It doesn't look straight through anymore, and that's one of the contributors to. So
what sort of costs are we looking at if you wanted to realign that off ramp? What sort of costs are just generally? What are you looking
generally, at? I had a little bit of a look at it. I think I do some civil engineering as well as traffic, so I know a little bit about these things. And the pavement is actually the cheap part on this one. The retaining wall will be expensive. I'm picking this a $300,000 to $350,000 job.
And to replace the overbridge?
We're talking 4 million, 3 to 4 million, because of the real issue is the complexity of what it does with the height and fixing this intersection here. As a result of raising it for the electrification. Secondly, so how do you building it while keeping it live? So it's very hard to build another bridge in its location, lining up with the existing bridge, while this one still exists.
So you'd put a new overbridge in if trucks turning left they go over the centre line. Is that the nub of it, or do you?
That's the suggestion. That's the suggestion from Ms. McMinn and Mr. Swears, is that the bridge needs replacing to accommodate this significant issue in their mind.
Surely you have a threshold that, as to the seriousness of that and safety. If you're wandering over that centre line and it's causing so many crashes per year, then you do start to look at it. If you're just, in theory, getting over the line, these trucks are going over it, but nothing else happens, where's the beef?
It's a good question. I mean, certainly at the moment there is no evidence of an issue in terms of safety. Of course, we don't want to create one, and I get that too. That's fair. But I do believe that most truck drivers, in fact, are professional and make these decisions. I think you alluded to earlier, all the time, every day. The other one, of course, is the risk to a cyclist who does choose to cycle over the bridge here, and it's very narrow, and getting collected by particularly if you're a cyclist coming up the off ramp and you're wanting to turn left and you're sitting here and a trailer comes around and takes you out. But in my supplementary evidence, I've suggested, well, that we can get around that with innovation. There are electronic signs that detect cyclists now and flash up warning signs to motorists when a cyclist is present. That's not uncommon now. So there are low-cost solutions like that which are quite effective, and I believe this could be a good candidate for it.
Okay.
So that's one of the key issues that's left outstanding. I feel that's why I did that extra work in the supplementary. One of the key issues, at least in Ms. McMinn's final report. Just looking back through here. Actually, I'll just jump to my summary. Sorry, jump around a little bit. The rest of my summary statement just talks about the local road upgrades. Of course, we're also proposing, it'll be subject to approvals, of course, but reinstating the left turn in from Great South Road the north end of Huntley into old Ohinewai South Road. And I believe that would take some of the local trips off the network that NZTA is very concerned about. I don't personally share the same concern about the local trips, and I don't think they have demonstrated in my mind at all that there is a significant issue. In fact, I've demonstrated in my rebuttal evidence that it isn't a significant issue to have short trips on that expressway between the two interchanges. But in saying that, we recognise that ideally, if you can, you want to try and minimise those, and so reinstating that left in from Great South Road is an opportunity that is reasonably straightforward in my mind. Of course, it will need to be safety.
Thank you.
Can't think of any other key issues. There was one about the left in, left out arrangement on next to the service centre, but I feel I've addressed that significantly in my rebuttal, unless you have questions about that further.
Well, let's, if you're finished, let's see if there are any questions. As I say, we have read all of the material. The one we were less familiar with is the supplementary that only came in on Friday, and no criticism implied there. So we're not as familiar as we are with the rest of it, with that piece. But you've explained that pretty carefully now. Yes. So my suggestion is, if you're finished, we'll see if there's any questions still outstanding. Are you at the point where that's an appropriate point for you to stop and us to start?
Yes, I believe so.
I just don't want to cut you off while you're in full flow, and so like.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think what other key issues. I don't see any other key issues here. Probably the public transport one. Sorry, there is one point that was at the end of my summary statement. So I just wanted to reiterate that in my mind, I have recommended to APL, and they have instigated in the master plan and also in the structure plan, every opportunity for public transport in future to service the site, albeit it may not be efficient to do so at the moment. So we have an interim solution and we have a long-term solution. Both easy access for the bus, both with good pedestrian and connections from within the development, and long-term for Ohinewai in general through the walking and cycling bridge that we're proposing. I'm aware that there are discussions between APL and Waikato Regional Council and Waikato District Council in terms of funding mechanisms going forward for public transport, to at least provide a service or to increase the existing service that runs to Te Kuara. And so Mr. Oliver may be able to speak more to that, but certainly there are discussions, good discussions that have been happening in the background. So I'm somewhat a little bit confused with Regional Council's view on the matter, where it is possible to provide this public transport, but they're saying it's not possible. So maybe you may understand that better than I do. But anyway, my view, it is possible, it certainly is achievable. And at the moment, the service that does exist stops at the town hall, which is, but yet it's predominantly used by people on the eastern side, certainly at the moment. So it makes a lot of sense going forward that this development, if this development occurs, that the bus stops be on the eastern side of the expressway. Now, the other point I would make, Mr. Swears and Ms. McMillan, for that matter, have also dealt that the pedestrian and cycling bridge, as I've talked about, would be attractive for use. And they cite average walk distance being 1.2 kilometres or something like that. Now, I want to just reiterate that I believe that's just based on data that isn't actually relevant to the site. It's not, what is relevant is what the actual locals are doing at present and are likely to do in future. And that's the best evidence I believe we can get. And certainly if you refer to my rebuttal evidence, you'll see in there that I've talked to a number of local people who live on the eastern side who have had children at the school, most recently as last year, and certainly all came back with support for such a bridge, such a path. If it existed, they would have used it. So I think, regardless of numbers that are cited from some statistics publication, which could be relevant to anywhere, I'm not sure, but certainly not here. 2 kilometres is not onerous in my mind, and it's certainly supported by the current locals that live on the eastern side. It's quite walkable and definitely can be cycled.
All right.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Inder. Let's see how we're going on the question front. Mr. Fulton?
Yeah, just a couple of things. The walking and cycling bridge, the access through to the school, is that already secured, that land through there, or is that
no, it's not.
Part of a consent?
It's not. We have got favourable support from the landowner, but there's nothing secured at this point.
Okay, thanks. The other one on public transport, I also am a little bit confused about the regional land transport view on that from the Waikato Regional Council, because it's my understanding that they have to provide it where the demand is. Is that your understanding?
Well, that's right. Typically, if there was demand here, you'd expect that they'll probably find a way, just like they have run a service recently to Te Kuara, even though you would argue, well, is that efficient? Well, there is demand there, so inefficient or not, there's a service running. It's for the people. I think in time, if there's demand here, then of course they would run a service.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's something we'll pursue with them. Okay. No, thank you. Good.
Mr. Mark?
Yeah, look, thank you for that, Mr. Inder. You've cleared up a number of matters for me personally. Things are a lot clearer that there are other solutions, I guess, going forward. So thank you very much. No questions.
Okay.
Thanks, Mr. Mark. Mr. Kearney?
Yeah, yes, just how do you stop people traversing, not using the walkway to school? How do you stop them taking the direct route across the intersections there? How do you do that?
By not making it attractive and having a far more attractive solution that's clearly safer. So the paths that we're proposing along Lumsden Road and along Tahuna Road connect up just to the east side of the existing roundabout on Lumsden and Tahuna. And then we're proposing some sort of pedestrian facility across there. It's currently shown as a raised pedestrian crossing. In my mind, that's a good solution. It may not be the solution that they end up with, but it certainly demonstrates there is a solution. Now, through there, you're basically, that's the last road you cross. From there, it's safe. You're walking down a 2.5 to 3 metre wide path. You're crossing over the rail, right over the expressway, and you 50 to 100 more metres, or probably actually 150 more metres, you were at the school. So an attractive, safe path that's not hidden in bushes or anything like that, next to, or when compared against a very narrow bridge with a large number of heavy vehicles and a lot of other traffic on it, in my mind, unless you're a very confident cyclist that owns the lane, that basically signals and knows when to signal and is very observant about other vehicles, unless you're that person, you would use the other bridge every day of the week. And in my mind, the evidence that I've got in my rebuttal from the existing locals who have had children, and still one of them does still have children at their school, they say they would use it if it existed, but they don't, so they drive their children across.
What sort of material is this pathway? What's it made out of? What is it? Is it
I hadn't thought that far ahead, to be honest, but it could be anywhere between, it could be asphalt, it could be concrete, it could be a limestone grit.
Yeah, yeah. If you flip this round and said, well, let's try and make as well a direct access across the two intersections safer, is it capable of being made safer, and what does it entail?
So the first two major obstacles, so I've alluded to one of them, well, both of them actually, but the first one, of course, is the rail over bridge. So you'd have to replace the bridge and to the current standard. So you'd have cycling lanes on both sides, and you'd have a footpath or at least on one side. Then you'd get to the intersections of the interchange. So the first one being the eastern intersection, and you've got an off-ramp and an on-ramp. And the southbound on-ramp is going to be busier than the than the southbound off-ramp. However, but not by a lot. So then you look at that and say, well, how do we get pedestrians and cyclists across that ramp safely? The only true safe way to do it is grade separation. So it's either bridge across or you go underneath. But that poses problems when you're trying to connect back to the rail overbridge. So if you put another bridge higher there, then you've got long ramps onto that. But then you've also, if you do a bridge over the ramps at the expressway, you've then just cut off a over-dimensioned load route, because over-dimensioned loads can't go underneath the expressway bridge, so they come off the ramp and go back down the on-ramp. So going across, putting another pedestrian bridge across those ramps becomes problematic. Secondly, you'd have to replace the expressway overbridge, because while it has some shoulder, 1 metre shoulders on either side for cycling, or for just shoulders actually, you wouldn't say that for cycling. The engineers looked at that bridge, and because of its design, double hollow core structure, it is very thin in terms of, or very efficient, I should say, in terms of its design, in terms of cost. So it's built for what you see, and tacking on or adding on another bridge for a path is next to impossible. The other thing that was done, because it was a design and construct build back in 2003, the ground improvements for the abutments and for which are mechanically stabilized earth walls, MSE walls, those support the bridge structure as you see at either end. The ground underneath that was very soft, so we've got as-built drawings showing all the ground improvements specifically in and around those abutments, but no further. So if we're going to add another bridge and we can't attach it to that bridge, then we have to have a separate bridge, and it's got to be separated enough that they don't seismically meet in the event of an earthquake. Then we're creating whole new abutments, whole new MSE walls on very poor ground. So
okay,
significant.
Okay, so it's pretty difficult.
It is difficult. I mean, as someone said it earlier, you can engineer your way out of everything, but just when does it become ridiculous? And there's a better solution.
What's the distance of the track to the access to the walking access to the school? What's the distance?
From the site?
Yeah.
Approximately 2 kilometres, give or take. Depends where you start from, of course, but say centrally, about 2 kilometres.
Okay. Okay. All right.
And it's about 9 to 10 kilometres back to Huntley.
Yeah. You mentioned, just finally finished up, but you mentioned, the kids can use e-bikes, but are pretty expensive, aren't they?
Sorry, I wasn't so much referring to kids. I was more referring to people who would say wanted to bike to Huntley.
Okay.
More adults. Certainly 10 kilometres is more achievable now than ever with e-bikes. And also if you lived in Huntley and wanted to work here, you don't have to go a short trip on the motorway, expressway, sorry, in your car. You can bike, and it's certainly possible now more than ever.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
I don't think I have any questions. Thank you, Mr. Inder. I think they've all been asked as we've gone along, and the rest of the panel have addressed it. Plus, we've obviously heard the expert conferencing sessions as well. So I don't think I have anything further at this point. So thank you very much for your evidence. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Mr. Berry, it's 10 to 5.
Yes.
What do you suggest we do?
I guess there might be quite a bit. The next witness is Robert Quigley, and in respect of that, there's obviously a significant difference of opinion between him and the regional council's witness. So you might want to spend more than 12 minutes with him, and we've got plenty of time to spare. So we have 17 witnesses down and 6 to go. So it might well be that we should adjourn now and start with Mr. Quigley in the morning.
Let's let's just hold that thought for one moment, insofar as maybe what we should do is use the time to figure out what happens tomorrow, and do a bit of a check on where we're at and where we think we'll be. It wouldn't be the panel's preference to finish mid-morning or early afternoon tomorrow if there was a realistic prospect of doing a bit of moving of things around to be more efficient. So, I mean, obviously, Mr. Berry, you can't control how long our questions will take, but you're probably getting a sense for how long. There's a couple of, as you say, quite meaty statements to go through tomorrow. But what's your best guess that if we were to adjourn once we finish this discussion, when do you anticipate your case concluding tomorrow?
Well, sir, I'd be, if we go anything like the pace we've been going today, I'd be surprised if we went beyond lunchtime, and may well be short of that. You'll probably have a fair bit of time with the two planners, but I can't imagine that Mr. Croft or Mr. Graham or Mr. Lawrence will take much longer than the witnesses today. And you might have half an hour with Mr. Quigley. So I would anticipate that we would finish easily by lunchtime.
What I think we might do and ask, rather than try and discuss it now, it would seem to me that that's probably about right, that about lunchtime tomorrow or thereabouts, bearing in mind that we can be flexible about when we actually stop. So if it means that we need to go for another half an hour to conclude something, we can certainly do that. We're pretty keen to use tomorrow productively, and not just abandon things at lunchtime because all the rest of the submitters say, well, I'm not scheduled till Wednesday and we're not ready. So I'm wondering if Mr. Bell in the morning or even this evening, you'd be able to make contact with the submitters and just do what you can to fill tomorrow afternoon's schedule in for us. Does that, what does the panel think about that as an approach?
Sounds like a great idea.
Yep, I'm happy with that.
Does anyone have any views on that or any initial comments they can make about their availability tomorrow? Because we have made it pretty clear that we do need people to be flexible. So I guess we'll make that observation first in case that incentivizes people to be helpful.
Can I talk?
Yes, please. Thanks, Mr. White.
Yeah, I'm representing both Ohinewai Area Committee and myself and my wife. So I'm open to go tomorrow afternoon if that makes sense.
All right, that's helpful. I'm going to I just want to get my schedule brought up. I mean, the big time issues are probably around the regional council and the transport agency. So I guess we would ask counsel for both of those parties, Ms. Shared and Mr. Lanning, how they're placed tomorrow.
It's Christina here. I'm fine to open tomorrow afternoon, and I think my experts are all fine as well. Just need to triple check that with them.
That's a very good start. I'm very pleased to hear that. How about you, Mr. Lanning?
Likewise, sir. I was hoping to, I'm in Auckland at the moment, I was hoping to come down to Hamilton to sit with the council team and have a bit of time to drive down. But if that doesn't work, then we'll work with you to make the hearing efficient.
Okay, well, I think that's a really good start. I don't think we need to necessarily go down the batting order any further than that for the purposes of where we're at. So let's adjourn today on the basis that we'll conclude the Ambery case lunchtime-ish, and we'll take a lunch break to suit that, with a view to Mr. White and or the transport agency and or the regional council. And I think between the three of them, that will probably take us through till tomorrow evening. And if we have to finish a little bit earlier or run over into Wednesday morning for that matter, so be it.
So the only comment I'd make there is you indicated at the start that you would like to have supporting submitters before the opposing submitters. And
that's true. We can. I don't believe they're likely to be. I just want to open my. I don't think we're fixated on that. I think that was just, you know, a nice to have. If we have to work around that, so be it. But if I look at my schedule at the moment, just brought it up, then really the only submitters in support that have requested time to speak are Ohinewai Lands Limited, who have got a fairly confined statement of evidence, and there's the area committee that's which I wouldn't have thought would be hugely lengthy either. So all we'd really be doing, I think, is starting, even if we concluded with them, I don't think that would take a huge amount of time, which would mean that the balance of the day from shortly after lunch would lead into the Transport Agency and the Regional Council anyway. That's the sequence that we have. So I'm not sure that that would make a huge difference, but stand to be corrected on that.
No, that's fine. So I just thought I'd flag that with you.
Oh, no, that's helpful. So I think let's adjourn on the basis that that's our working hypothesis. If both council for the agency and for the Regional Council could just work their magic with their witnesses and make sure they are available tomorrow afternoon, that would be helpful, and we can just clear that up first thing in the morning before we start.
Right.
Is there anything anyone needs to raise before we adjourn for the evening? Anything?
Mr. Chairman, one of the things we didn't mention when we opened was that we've actually been to the site and the surrounding area, and we've inspected it.
Yes, that's very true. All right, is there anything else anyone else wants to raise with us now? All right, well, I think on that basis, we'll adjourn until 9 o'clock in the morning. Please, we're not going to delay. If people aren't there, we're going to start at or about 9 o'clock. So it's pretty hard to keep track of about 40 individuals. So we'll just rely on you to be on time, and we'll kick off promptly at 9 in the morning. So for those of you that are traveling, travel safely, and thanks everybody for their time today. It's been quite a big day, but I think it's been a very helpful one. So on that basis, we'll adjourn till 9 in the morning. Thank you.
See you tomorrow morning. Do you want us to stay on the line, Mr. Chair?
If the panel could just hold fire.